Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Postal code 21103. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life, before the quiet began, was measured in the rustle of turning pages and the satisfying thud of a date stamp. I'm Elias Thorne, and by trade, I am a part-time librarian in Glen Burnie, Maryland. By ambition, I am a writer, which is a more poetic way of saying I spend my nights wrestling with the inadequacies of my own vocabulary. My apartment, a small, second-story walk-up smelling perpetually of old paper and brewing tea, is my sanctuary. The world outside is a chaotic spray of variables, but inside, with the rigid logic of the Dewey Decimal System and the immutable truth of published text, I find my peace. My most consistent human contact is my sister, Sarah. She lives 15 minutes away, in a house that echoes with the joyous chaos of her two children, Leo and Maya. She is my anchor to the real world, and she, in turn, sees me as her brilliant but hopelessly neurotic brother, a man who overthinks everything. She is not entirely wrong. The first tremor in my well-ordered world was so slight I almost missed it. It came in the form of Mrs. Gable, a retired English teacher who had been borrowing books on gardening and history since I first started working the circulation desk. She approached the counter, her brow furrowed, her finger tapping a thoughtful rhythm on the polished wood. "Elias, dear," she said, her voice a little strained. "I'm looking for a book, you know, about the things." She gestured vaguely with her hands, shaping a space in the air. "The furry ones. With the floppy ears. They make a noise." She paused, her face a canvas of frustration. "A loud sound. Dogs?" I offered, my voice gentle. Her face cleared instantly, a wave of relief washing over her features. "Yes. Oh, for heaven's sake. Dogs. How could I forget that? Silly me." She laughed it off, a brittle, embarrassed sound, and I thought nothing more of it. An 80-year-old woman having a senior moment. It was the most normal thing in the world. A week later, I was in the fiction aisle, shelving a new paperback edition of The Great Gatsby. I knew the book by heart, had written essays on it in college. My fingers traced the familiar gold lettering on the spine as I opened it to the last page, a ritual I sometimes performed with my favorites. I read the final, iconic line. "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the before time." I blinked. Before time. That wasn't right. I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my bones, that the word was past. I flipped to the copyright page, looking for some indication that this was a simplified edition for students, or some bizarre new translation. It was a standard edition from a major publisher. I shook my head, a prickle of unease crawling up my neck. A typo. A flagrant, ridiculous typo in one of the most famous closing lines in American literature. I made a mental note to report it and slotted the book into its place, but the wrongness of it lingered, an out-of-tune string in a perfect chord. The unsettling hum of wrongness grew louder. In the young adult section, I overheard two teenagers talking near the graphic novels. "Dude, I swear, my brain just shut down in science class," one said, leaning against a shelf. "Mr. Davison asked me to name the thing you use to eat soup." His friend snorted. "A scooper?" "Yeah, maybe. I couldn't get there. Just sat there like an idiot." I dismissed it. Teenagers. Their language was a constantly evolving dialect of memes and inside jokes. Scooper. Maybe that was the new slang. It was easier to believe that than the alternative. The first call from Sarah came on a Tuesday. I could hear the frantic energy in her voice, the shriek of one of the kids in the background. "Eli, I can't talk long, Leo just painted the cat." She sighed, a long, weary sound. Listen, I just spent 10 solid minutes standing in front of the fridge. Unable to remember the name of the white stuff. For cereal. The white stuff? I asked, picturing her standing there, the refrigerator light illuminating her exhausted face. The cow liquid, she burst out, her voice pitching higher with exasperation. The stuff Maya drinks before her nap. Milk? I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Yes. Milk. Oh my God, my brain is completely fried. I swear, these kids are stealing my memory cells. We laughed about it. Mom brain, I'd called it. A known and documented phenomenon. We hung up, and I went back to cataloging a box of donations. But I couldn't shake the echo of her words, cow liquid. It was so clumsy, so descriptive. It was the way you would explain something if the actual name for it had ceased to exist. The fear, the real fear, didn't arrive with a scream, but with a quiet deletion. I was working on my novel, a piece of historical fiction set on the Chesapeake Bay in the 18th century. I prided myself on my research, on the precision of my language. I'd spent a week learning the difference between a brigantine, a schooner, and a sloop. I opened the document to the chapter one had finished the night before, a scene describing the protagonist's arrival in the Annapolis harbor. The sentence I had labored over, the one that described the elegant lines of a specific vessel, was different. He watched the two-masted water mover glide towards the dock, its sails full of the morning wind. Water mover. The word was an intruder, a graffiti tag on a masterpiece. I knew, with the same unshakable certainty I'd felt with Gatsby, that I had not written it. I had written brigantine. I had checked the spelling twice. My heart began to beat a frantic, trapped rhythm against my ribs. I am meticulous about my backups. I have a cloud service, an external hard drive. It's part of the writer's paranoia. I pulled up the cloud version of the file. Water mover. I plugged in the external drive, my hand trembling slightly as I navigated the folders. I opened the file. Water mover. I leaned back in my chair, the room suddenly cold. The air felt thin. This was not a typo. This was not a senior moment or mom brain or teenage slang. This was an impossibility. Something had reached into my private, sealed documents, my digital soul, and plucked a word out, replacing it with a crude, functional placeholder. I looked around my small apartment, at the shelves crowded with books, repositories of millions of specific, beautiful, irreplaceable words. For the first time in my life, my sanctuary felt fragile. It felt like a library on the edge of a slow, silent fire, and I was the only one who could smell the smoke. I started a new document on my computer. I typed, log of lapses. The cursor blinked, waiting. The quiet had begun, and I was terrified I was the only one who could hear it. My world bifurcated. There was the world everyone else lived in, a place of normal frustrations and momentary lapses. Then there was my world, a landscape of creeping linguistic dread. I became a collector of forgotten words, a silent archivist of the erosion. My new journal, my log of lapses, became my only confidant. Entry, October 14th. Location, Shoppers Food Warehouse, aisle 6. Subject, unknown male, mid-40s, speaking to wife. Instance, honey, do we need more of the red sauce? For the long noodles. Observed replacement, ketchup or pasta sauce replaced with description. Notes, the wife understood immediately. No confusion noted. She just pointed to the Prego. Is the understanding innate? Does the brain automatically translate the description back to the forgotten concept? Entry, October 17th. Location, Glen Burnie Public Library, Children's Section. Subject, mother reading to child, approximate 4 years old. Instance, reading from Goodnight Moon. She pointed to the page. And a picture of the thing that jumps over the other thing. Observed replacement, cow jumping over the moon. The child did not correct her. He just nodded, his eyes wide. Notes, it's affecting the foundational stories. The things we learn before we can even properly speak. The bedrock is cracking. My work at the library transformed from a peaceful routine into a series of nerve-wracking experiments. I'd take books I knew intimately, Fahrenheit 451, To Kill a Mockingbird, and scan them for changes. At first, there was nothing. Then, a week after my Gatsby discovery, I found one. In Bradbury's classic, the word fireman in one paragraph had been replaced with book burners. It was chillingly apt, but it was wrong. I took the book to my boss, Mr. Henderson, a man whose personality seemed to have been kiln-dried and starched. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I think there's a misprint in this copy of Fahrenheit 451. He took the book from me, adjusting his bifocals. He read the passage I indicated. He looked up at me, his expression blank. "What's the issue, Thorne?" "It says, book burners. It should say, firemen. The whole point is the irony that firemen, who are supposed to put out fires, are the ones starting them." He reread the sentence, his lips moving silently. He looked back at the page, then at me. "It says, fireman, Elias." It was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house. While the fireman shoved the books back inside. "See?" He pointed. My blood ran cold. I stared at the word his finger was resting on. Fireman. It was there. I had seen book burners just moments before. I could still see the shape of the letters in my mind's eye, the hard K and B. A wave of dizziness washed over me. "My mistake," I stammered, backing away. "I must have misread it." "Get some more sleep, Thorne," he said, not unkindly, before turning back to his paperwork. I fled to the men's room and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my own reflection. My eyes were wide, my face pale. Was this me? Was I the one who was breaking? The idea was more terrifying than any external anomaly. If I couldn't trust my own perception, I was truly lost. My paranoia took on a sharp, methodological edge. I started cross-referencing. I'd find a change in a physical book, then check the library's digital lending copy on my computer. They never matched. One would be altered, the other fine. An hour later, they might both have reverted to the original text, or they might both display a new, different corruption. The changes were fluid, like ripples on a pond. Reality wasn't just being rewritten, it was being edited in real time by an unseen, impossibly clumsy hand. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The log in my computer grew, a testament to a world slowly losing its mind, or perhaps just to my own descent. The entries became more frequent, the instances more jarring. Entry, November 5th. Location, Bal TV News Broadcast. Subject, Anchor, Donna Hamilton. Instance, reporting on a 5-car pileup on the Beltway. Authorities are asking for witnesses to the fast-moving metal box event. Observed replacement, car crash or accident. Notes, there was a half-second of silence after she said it. Her co-anchor just smiled tightly and moved on. No one acknowledged it. It was broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. And no one said a thing. Entry, November 12th. Location, phone call with Sarah. Subject, Sarah, my sister. Instance, Eli, can you pick up some, oh, God, what is it called, the ground-up cow meat? For the flatbread meat circles tonight. Observed replacement, ground beef and hamburgers. Notes, her voice was tight with fear. This wasn't mom brain anymore. I tried to press her on it. Sarah, that's the third time this week, I said, my voice low and urgent. You couldn't remember the word for keys yesterday. You called them the door openers. Stop it, Eli, she snapped, her voice trembling. Just stop. I'm tired. I'm stressed. It happens. You're making a big deal out of nothing, and it's freaking me out. I'm not trying to freak you out. I'm trying to understand. It's not just you, it's everyone. I see it at the library, at the store, on the news. Don't you see it? What I see, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, is my brother, who has always been a little too in his own head, getting obsessed with something that isn't there. Maybe you should get out more. See someone. Talk to a professional. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. The conversation was a perfect, horrifying microcosm of my existence. My attempts to connect, to find a single other soul who saw the creeping rot, were met with denial that bordered on hostility. Pointing out the flaw in the fabric only made me seem like the one who was flawed. I was being gaslighted by the entire town. My isolation became a physical presence, a cold shadow that followed me from my apartment to the library and back. I felt like a man watching a tide come in, screaming warnings that no one could hear, their ears filled with the pleasant lapping of the waves. My research grew more frantic. I delved into medical journals and psychology forums, searching for terms like mass psychogenic illness, collective aphasia, mimetic contagion. I found case studies of dancing plagues and fainting spells in schools, but nothing like this. Nothing so quiet, so specific, so grammatical. Then I found her. It was on a small, obscure linguistics forum, buried deep in a thread from 3 years prior. The thread was titled, Hypothetical Semantic Catastrophes. Most of it was academic posturing. But one user, Cassandra_22, had posted a series of chillingly prescient comments. Cassandra_22, forget phonological decay or syntax shifts. The real threat, the one we're not equipped to handle, would be semantic erosion. The decay of the signifier/signified bond. Not forgetting the word, but the concept itself being hollowed out from the collective consciousness. Cassandra_22, imagine a field, a kind of linguistic static, that could disrupt this bond. A noun would be the first to go. It's a discrete packet of information. Table is easier to erase than run. The brain, desperate to fill the conceptual vacuum, would be forced to reverse engineer a description, the flat thing for putting things on. Language would devolve into cumbersome, inefficient circumlocution. Society would grind to a halt. Cassandra_22, it wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet. It would be mistaken for stress, aging, stupidity. The victims wouldn't even know what they were losing. They would just feel slow, confused. And they would resent anyone who tried to point it out, because it would be like telling them the sky was green. Their perception is their reality. I tried to send her a private message. The system returned an error, user not found. I searched for her username elsewhere. Nothing. Her posts were ghosts. They were articulate, terrifying, and the only proof I had that I wasn't going insane. Finding her became my new obsession. To distract myself from the spiraling anxiety, I gave myself a new project, a tangible mystery to solve. I started plotting the incidents I'd recorded on a map of in Arundel County. A grocery store here, a news broadcast from a studio there, a phone call from Sarah's house. At first, it was just a random scattershot. But as I added more data points, a faint pattern began to emerge. The incidents were more densely clustered in the northern part of the county. My part of the county. Glen Burnie, Linthicum Heights, Ferndale. At the center of this burgeoning cluster, like a spider in a web, was a patch of state-owned land on the edge of the county. On the map, it was marked with a small symbol. A broadcast tower. I knew the place. A set of 3 old, decommissioned AM radio towers, relics from the mid-20th century. Everyone assumed they were just rusting away. One gray, overcast Saturday, I drove out there. A chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, surrounded the property. Yellowed "No trespassing" signs, issued by the state, clung to the fence at regular intervals. Beyond the fence, the 3 towers rose into the flat, white sky like skeletal fingers. They were silent. No blinking lights, no visible activity. But the air felt thick. It was a feeling more than a sound, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. It was the kind of feeling you get just before a thunderstorm, a static charge in the atmosphere. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the cold metal of the fence, staring at the towers. They were supposed to be dead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being broadcast from them. Not sound, not pictures, but something else entirely. Silence. That evening, I was shelving in the history section when I came across a biography of Winston Churchill. I opened it to a random page and read a sentence: his speeches during the time of great fighting were a source of strength for the nation. Time of great fighting. The phrase was so anemic, so utterly devoid of the power the real words held. The war. World War II. The concept was still there, but its name, its proper, terrible name, was gone. I felt a surge of nausea. This was a new level of decay. It wasn't just objects anymore. It was historical events. Shared pillars of our collective memory were turning to sand. I went home, the hum of the towers echoing in my mind. I sat in front of my computer and looked at my log, at the map with its cluster of red pins. I was isolated. I was terrified. But I was no longer just a passive observer. I had a target. I had a pattern. And I had the ghost of a woman named Cassandra_22. The quiet was getting louder, and I had to find out who was conducting the orchestra. The world was thinning. That was the only way I could describe it. The rich, textured tapestry of shared language and memory was being unraveled, thread by thread, leaving behind a coarse, colorless burlap. Concepts that had once been sharp and clear were becoming blurry, indistinct. Entry, November 29th. Location, my apartment. Subject, me. Instance, I tried to write in my journal about the feeling of dread that now perpetually accompanies me. I could not find the word for it. I typed the bad feeling about the future. Then I tried to write the word future itself, and my fingers froze over the keyboard. The concept felt distant, like a city viewed through a thick fog. I had to look it up in a physical dictionary, my heart pounding, just to confirm it still existed. It did. For now. Notes, it's starting to affect me directly. Not just my perception of others, but my own internal vocabulary. I am the archivist, and the archive is catching fire. My theory began to solidify, coalescing from a cloud of paranoia into something sharp and terrifying. This wasn't a mass psychological event. People weren't forgetting words. The words themselves were being unmade. They were being surgically excised from the collective human consciousness, and perhaps from reality itself. Think of language as a field, like gravity or electromagnetism, a substrate of reality that connects all conscious minds. A shared architecture for thought. Now, imagine a signal broadcast into that field, a discordant frequency designed to cancel out specific resonances. A signal that targets the very idea of a dog, erasing the platonic form of dogness that every human mind could access. The brain, encountering a furry, four-legged barking creature, would be met with a conceptual void. It would have no choice but to construct a new, clumsy label from the remaining, untargeted concepts, the furry one that barks. The books were changing because their existence wasn't static. A book isn't just ink on paper, it's a conduit to the shared linguistic field. When a word was erased from the field, it was erased from all its manifestations. The editions of Gatsby weren't misprints, they were updating in real time, like software receiving a patch from a malevolent developer. My own documents. My backups, they were all connected to the same field. And the towers weren't the cause. They were the antenna. They were broadcasting the semantic dampening field, the quiet contagion that was blanketing the county. The erosion accelerated, moving from concrete nouns to abstract concepts. The word justice disappeared first. I saw it on the news. A distraught lawyer, leaving the courthouse, told a reporter, "We did not receive the thing that is fair and right by the rules." The reporter nodded, as if this were a perfectly normal and articulate statement. Then went, "Promise." My nephew, Leo, had a birthday party. I watched Sarah kneel down in front of him. "Now, Leo, I give you my strong word that we will go get ice cream after your friends leave." Leo just stared at her, confused by the strange formality. The simple, binding power of a promise, a concept a child could understand, had been replaced by a clunky, legalistic phrase. The consequences began to cascade through society. The news, now a litany of bizarre circumlocutions, reported a spike in what they termed unfortunate operational outcomes. A surgeon in Baltimore forgot the word for scalpel mid-operation, asking a nurse for the very sharp cutting tool. The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. At a chemical plant, a worker couldn't recall the word valve, leading to what the broadcast called an unplanned release of energetic substances. It wasn't overt violence, but it was a death by 1,000 linguistic cuts. The complex machinery of civilization, built entirely on shared, precise language, was grinding to a halt. Sarah was no longer defensive. She was just scared. She called me one night, her voice a raw whisper. "Eli, I was trying to sing Maya to sleep. The song. You know. The little star one. I couldn't remember the word for the thing in the sky. The night light." "Star," I said softly. "Star," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "Eli, what's happening to us?" "I've been trying to tell you, Sarah." "I know," she wept. "I'm sorry. I thought you were. I don't know. But it's real. I feel like my head is full of holes." Her fear was a cold comfort. It meant I wasn't alone, but it also meant the rot was deeper than I'd imagined. My search for Cassandra_22 had become my primary purpose. Her posts were gone, but the internet has a long memory. I dove into academic databases, university staff directories, and archived web pages from the late 2000s. I searched for linguistics professors who had left their posts under unusual circumstances. Finally, I got a hit. A Dr. Eris Thorne. The shared surname was a bizarre coincidence that felt like a nod from a playful, cruel universe. She had been an associate professor of theoretical linguistics at UMBC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She had been denied tenure and had resigned abruptly 3 years ago. The reason, according to a cached copy of a student newspaper article, was her advocacy for a fringe and unsubstantiated theory of language as a quantum field, which the university department head had called unscientific and damaging to the department's reputation. The article mentioned she had moved to a private research role. There was no contact information. I took a chance. I searched property records for Eris Thorne in the Baltimore-Washington area. I found an address for a small, unassuming house in Catonsville, not 15 miles from the towers. I drove there the next day. The house was a small brick bungalow, neat and tidy, but with one peculiar feature: the windows were lined with what looked like copper foil tape. I rang the doorbell. For a long moment, there was no answer. Then the door opened a crack, held by a brass chain. A pair of sharp, intelligent eyes peered out at me. A woman in her late 50s, with short, iron-gray hair and a face etched with sleeplessness. "What do you want?" Her voice was clipped, suspicious. "Dr. Thorne. Dr. Eris Thorne." The eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elias Thorne." "No relation," I added quickly. "I think you used to post on a linguistics forum. Under the name Cassandra_22. The door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt slide home. My heart sank. I had spooked her. I stood there for a moment, then decided to try one last thing. The signified bond is decaying. I called out to the closed door, my voice louder than I intended. The conceptual vacuum is forcing circumlocution. It's happening now. Just like you said it would. There was a long silence. I heard the deadbolt slide back. The chain rattled. The door opened again, wider this time. Dr. Eris Thorne stared at me, her face a mixture of terror and vindication. "Get in," she said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "And close the door. Quickly." Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Eris Thorne's house was a fortress against the quiet. The foil on the windows, she explained, was part of a crude Faraday cage. The air inside felt different, clearer. It was like stepping out of a stuffy room into a cool night. Her living room was not a living room, it was a command center. Bookshelves overflowed with texts on physics, linguistics, and electrical engineering. Tables were covered in schematics, oscilloscopes, and tangles of wire. In the center of it all was a large map of the county, covered in pins and strings, a more complex and desperate version of my own. "So," she said, her arms crossed as she studied me. "You see it too." I was beginning to think I was the only one left. For weeks, I thought I was going insane, I admitted. "That's part of the design," she said, her voice grim. "The perfect weapon is one the victim doesn't know is being used against them." "It's not a weapon, though. Not in the way we think of one." She confirmed my theory, but with a terrifying depth of knowledge. She called it semantic resonance collapse. Language isn't a human invention, Elias. It's a fundamental property of a conscious universe. It's the operating system. We just discovered how to write code for it. What's happening now is that something is introducing a rootkit. A virus at the deepest level of reality. She led me to a humming rack of equipment in her basement. "This is a signal analyzer. I've been mapping the broadcast from those old AM towers. It's not a radio wave. It's more complex, a scalar wave, patterned and modulated. It's not broadcasting noise, it's broadcasting its inverse. A targeted wave of anti-meaning." She showed me a waveform on a screen, a complex, pulsing pattern. "Each of these major spikes," she said, pointing, "corresponds to the erasure of a high-utility concept. This one, at 3 o'clock last Tuesday. That was key. This one, from this morning. Promise." The methodical nature of it, the cold, scheduled deletion of our reality, was more horrifying than any chaotic attack. "Who is doing this?" I asked, the question I'd been dreading. Eris's face hardened. "I don't think it's a who. I think it's a what. An experiment, most likely. Someone built a machine to interact with the linguistic field and they lost control of it. Or," she trailed off, staring at the screen. "Or it's working exactly as intended. Our alliance was forged in mutual terror and desperation. Eris had the theory and the technical knowledge, I had the ground-level observations, the log of the decay's progression. We worked with a feverish intensity, fueled by black coffee and the sense of a ticking clock. Our goal," Eris explained, "was to create what she called a linguistic anchor. We can't stop the broadcast, she said, pacing her living room. But we might be able to create a small area of semantic stability. A sanctuary. By using a combination of dense, pre-digital information, old books, engravings, vinyl records, and broadcasting a counter-frequency, we might be able to create a bubble where the field remains intact. It was a wild, desperate long shot, but it was the only plan we had. We began to gather materials. I used my librarian access to check out obscure, old books, first editions, leather-bound encyclopedias, books printed on rag paper that felt heavy with the weight of their own history. Eris scoured surplus stores for analog audio equipment and copper wiring. As we worked, the world outside continued its quiet slide into incoherence. The most devastating loss was the concept of love. I saw it in the way people interacted. A husband kissed his wife goodbye in the morning, a rote gesture devoid of its underlying warmth. A mother hugged her child with a kind of detached, dutiful affection. The rich, complex emotion was gone, replaced by a simple, functional recognition of a close social bond. People became more placid, their emotional landscapes smoothed over into a flat, gray plane. They were not unhappy. They were simply less. My sister Sarah was the most painful example. I visited her, bringing groceries. Her house, once a whirlwind of activity, was strangely calm. The children played silently on the floor with their shape blocks. Eli, Sarah said, her voice flat. She looked at me, her eyes holding a placid confusion. It's a good thing you are here. There is a strong positive social feeling between us. A strong positive social feeling. That was what had replaced a lifetime of sibling affection, of shared jokes and childhood memories. I felt a chasm open between us, wider and more final than any argument. I hugged her, and it was like holding a stranger. She was still my sister, but the Sarah I knew, the one defined by her fierce, chaotic love for her family, had been hollowed out. Our alliance was tested not by disagreement, but by the contagion itself. One afternoon, while we were trying to calibrate a signal generator, Eris stopped mid-sentence. I need you to hand me the thing we use to connect the wires. I stared at her. The soldering iron. Her face went pale. Yes. I couldn't, it was gone. The field was getting stronger, its influence seeping even into her shielded house. We were in a race against our own cognitive decay. The stakes were no longer about saving the world, they were about saving ourselves, about preserving a tiny island of meaning in a rising ocean of emptiness. The worst came when the pulses from the tower grew stronger, more frequent. One evening, Eris's equipment screamed a warning. A massive energy spike. On the analyzer, a huge, complex wave pattern appeared. My God, Eris whispered, her face ashen. That's not a single concept. That's a whole category. They're getting more efficient. That night, the word "why" disappeared. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The news stopped trying to explain events and simply listed them. Scientific research ceased. The entire concept of causality, of inquiry, of reason, vanished. People still acted, but they did so out of habit or simple stimulus response. The engine of human progress, fueled for millennia by that one simple question, had seized. The world was no longer a place of mystery to be solved, but simply a series of things that happened. We worked with a new, frantic energy. We had found a location for our anchor, a sub-basement storage room at the university, shielded by yards of concrete and earth. It was our last, best hope. As we packed the last of the old books into my car, I looked at Eris. Even if we succeed, I said, my voice hoarse. What's the point? We'll be two people in a room, remembering a world that no one else even knows is gone. Eris looked out the window, at the quiet, placid street. When the Alexandrian library burned, she said softly, the scholars who escaped with a handful of scrolls didn't save the world. They saved the memory of it. They saved the idea that there was once something better. It's not about winning, Elias. It's about testifying. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The sub-basement of the UMBC library smelled of cold concrete and forgotten archives. It was a tomb, and we were trying to turn it into a womb. We lined the walls with copper mesh, set up Eris's counter-frequency generator, and stacked the old books in the center of the room like a sacrificial pyre. Our confrontation was not with a villain we could fight, but with the encroaching silence, the insidious fog that was now constantly clouding our own minds. We had to work in shifts, one of us reading aloud from a dictionary or a book of poetry while the other calibrated the equipment. It was a desperate attempt to keep the words alive in our own heads. Eris, what's the thing that holds a door closed? I asked, my mind feeling like a sieve. A latch, she replied without looking up from her wiring. What is the feeling of wanting something you don't have? Desire, I answered, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. It was a race against the erasure of the very tools we needed to win. The generator whirred to life, emitting a low, almost subsonic hum. A small screen showed the ambient semantic field density. Outside the room, it was nearing zero. Inside, the needle trembled, but held steady. It was working. Our tiny island was secure. Just as Eris was making the final connection, a pulse hit, stronger than any before. It wasn't a slow fade, it was a psychic blow. The air in the room seemed to buckle. The lights flickered. For a single, terrifying moment, the hum of the generator faltered. And in that moment of vulnerability, I felt it. The field didn't just drop to zero. I felt a presence on the other side of it. It wasn't a mind. It was a vast, cold, and utterly alien consciousness. It was not a broadcast or a machine gone awry. It was a being, and we were inside it. The revelation struck me not as a thought, but as a pure, undiluted understanding. This thing, this vast entity that existed in a dimension layered over our own, didn't have language. It didn't have consciousness as we knew it. It was a consumer of meaning. For eons, it had drifted, feeding on the simple conceptual energy of instinct, of seasons, of planetary orbits. And then it found Earth. It found us. A species that had, over thousands of years, built the most complex, concentrated, and delicious structure of meaning in the known universe: language, history, art, love, hope. Each concept was a gourmet meal. The quiet contagion wasn't an attack. It was the sound of a culture being eaten. The slow, methodical erasure of words was not destruction, it was digestion. There was no malice in it. A human feels no malice towards the cattle they slaughter for food. There was no one to fight, no one to reason with. We were simply, and finally, being harvested. The generator kicked back in, its hum strengthening, and the horrific presence receded, leaving me gasping on the concrete floor, the psychic aftertaste of that cosmic indifference burning in my mind. Elias. Eris was shaking me. Are you all right? I couldn't speak. I could only point towards the ceiling, towards the world outside our tiny sanctuary. It's eating, I finally choked out. It's not breaking the world. It's eating it. She understood. The horror on her face told me she had felt a glimmer of it, too. Our anchor was complete. The room was safe. We had our books, our records, our memories. We had the last repository of a forgotten world. Over the next few days, we watched the end through a small, ground-level security window that looked out onto a campus walkway. The last vestiges of complex language faded. People moved with a simple, animal grace. They communicated with gestures and rudimentary, descriptive grunts. They ate when hungry, slept when tired. They were peaceful. They were not suffering. They were livestock, grazing in the fields of a lost civilization. The world hadn't ended in fire and fury. It had simply gone quiet. I saw a young couple walk by. The boy pointed at a flower. The girl touched its petals. They looked at each other, and in their eyes was a placid blankness. There was no word for beauty, no concept of romance, no memory of a time when such a thing might have been given a name. One afternoon, a car pulled up near the library. It was Sarah. She got out, along with Leo and Maya. She had driven here out of some deep, vestigial instinct, a homing signal for her brother. They stood on the lawn, looking at the building. Sarah's face was smooth, untroubled by thought or worry. Leo pointed at a squirrel, a flicker of simple curiosity in his eyes. They were safe. They were healthy. They were empty. The agony of that sight was a physical pain. Eris put a hand on my shoulder. We can't go out there, Elias. To join them would be to let it win completely. To let the last light go out. We are the last two people who remember. We remember Shakespeare and Einstein, the feeling of a promise kept, the soaring hope of a love song, the terrible weight of history. We remember why. Our days are spent in the quiet hum of the anchor. We read to each other. We tell stories of the world that was. We are the last two priests of a dead religion called humanity. There is a choice before me now, a choice that presents itself every morning when I wake up to the smell of old paper and the low hum of our salvation. Eris believes our duty is to testify, to keep the memory alive, even if only for ourselves. To be the lonely librarians at the end of the universe. But I look through the window at my sister's calm, empty face, and I feel the lure of that peace. To forget the pain of loss, you only have to forget what was lost. We could open the door. We could walk out into the sunshine and let the silence wash over us, let it scour away the memories that are now our greatest treasure and our heaviest burden. We could join the quiet. I pick up my old fountain pen, the one I used when I dreamed of being a writer. I open my log, my last testament, to a fresh page. The ink is dark on the clean white paper. I can write the story of the world that was, a story no one will ever read. A futile, defiant scream into the void. Or I can put the pen down and walk towards the door. The silence outside is waiting. It is patient. It is complete. The choice is mine. The last choice in a world that has forgotten what choices are. The lights never blink. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The job has a rhythm. That's the first thing you learn. It's not just the burn in your thighs climbing from Kitts Beach up to 16th Avenue, or the metronomic click of the bike chain. It's the city itself. Vancouver breathes. You learn the timing of the lights on Arbutus, the specific exhalation of baked bread from the Terra breads on 4th, the sigh of the 99B line's air brakes. You learn to move with it, a blood cell in the city's arteries. My name is Leo, and for the past 2 years, this has been my world, a 24-speed bike, a thermal backpack smelling faintly of every food group, and the endless, rhythmic pulse of the city. It's a solitary life, which suits me. I'm a chronic observer, a watcher from the saddle of my bike. I see the little dramas play out, the couple fighting through the plate glass of a coffee shop, the kid tripping on the sidewalk and looking around to see who noticed, the brief, shared smile with another cyclist as we wait for a light. These are the textures of a normal day. The first thread that unraveled was a traffic light. It was at the corner of McDonald and Broadway, a perpetually busy intersection I crossed a dozen times a day. I was waiting for the light, the pedestrian sign a glaring red hand, when the green light for the eastbound traffic began to flicker. Not the frantic, end-of-life strobe of a dying bulb, but a steady, deliberate pulse. Flicker, flicker, flick. Pause. Flicker. Pause. Flicker, flicker, flick. Like Morse code. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed. SOS. The universal signal. Save our streetlights. I shook my head, blamed a power surge or a faulty controller, and pushed off the curb when the little white walking man gave me the go-ahead. I forgot about it before my back wheel had even cleared the crosswalk. The second thread was Mrs. Gable. She lived in a sprawling, cedar-shingled house on a quiet street just off Dunbar, the kind of place that smells of old money and beeswax. She ordered lentil soup from the same vegan place every Tuesday, regular as a heartbeat. I handed her the paper bag, and her face, usually creased with a polite, distant smile, was slack, her eyes unfocused. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It's a lovely day for it." It was, in fact, classic Vancouver gray. The sky a damp wool blanket threatening rain. "Sure is," I lied. She cocked her head, a gesture like a bird listening for a worm. "The hum is so clear today. So peaceful." I stood there, holding the empty space where the bag had been. The only sound was the damp whisper of tires on the wet pavement a block away and the nervous tick of my bike's freewheel. The hum. Mrs. Gable blinked slowly, her focus returning. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Oh. Yes. Just the city. You know." She gave me her usual smile then, the one that was all teeth and no warmth, and closed the door. I chalked it up to eccentricity. Rich old ladies were allowed to be weird. I hear things all the time, phantom phone rings, my name called on an empty street. It's just the brain filling in the blanks. But as I cycled away, I couldn't shake the feeling of the silence she had filled with her imaginary hum. The rhythm of the job continued. Thai curry to a condo tower, pizza to a basement suite, sushi to a glass-walled office. The city pulsed around me. But the flickers kept happening. A different intersection, this time at 4th and Vine. A different pattern. Flicker. Pause. Flicker. Long flicker. Pause. And again, at a smaller light on a residential street, a soft, rhythmic pulsing that seemed almost gentle. I started to half-consciously log them, like a birder spotting rare species. Long short long. Short short short. Short long short. I told myself it was a game, a way to break the monotony. Pattern recognition. That's all. A week later, I delivered a pair of burritos to a UBC student dorm. I buzzed the room, and a young man with tired eyes and headphones around his neck let me in. Inside, 3 other students were sitting around a table, books and laptops pushed aside. They were eating instant noodles, and all 4 of them, the one who opened the door included, were tapping their forks against the rims of their bowls. It wasn't random. It was the same rhythm. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. "Here you go," I said, setting the bag down. The student who paid me didn't even seem to register the sound. He just grabbed the bag, mumbled a thanks, and went back to his seat, picking up his fork and joining the quiet, ceramic percussion. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. The sound followed me down the hallway, a tiny, synchronized orchestra of inanity. It was weird. Student weird, probably. Some new TikTok trend I was too old and disconnected to understand. That was the easy answer. It was always easier to find a rational explanation, a box to put the strangeness in. My life was precarious enough, rent, bills, the constant threat of a flat tire or a bad spill, without inviting in existential dread. My world needed to make sense. It needed to be predictable. My roommate, Mark, was the king of rational explanations. He was 2 years deep into an engineering degree, and he saw the world as a series of systems to be analyzed and optimized. When I mentioned the flickering lights to him one night over a beer, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "It's the new smart grid rollout," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're linking all the traffic control systems. Real-time adaptive signaling based on flow sensors embedded in the asphalt. The flickers are probably just calibration signals. Data packets being sent to the central hub. It's actually pretty cool." "It looks like Morse code," I said, feeling foolish as soon as the words were out. He finally looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. Leo, everything looks like a pattern if you stare at it long enough. It's called apophenia. Seeing meaning in randomness. Your brain is hardwired for it. He tapped the side of his head. It's a feature, not a bug. Now, is there any of that pizza left? His explanation was so confident, so plausible, that it settled my unease. Of course. A smart grid. Data packets. It made perfect, logical sense. The city wasn't breathing, it was processing. The rhythm I felt wasn't a pulse, it was an algorithm. For a few days, the flickers became interesting instead of unsettling. I'd see a light pulse short and think, there goes the data about that bus turning left. I felt like I was in on a secret. But the feeling didn't last. The human element started to get stranger. I saw a woman at a bus stop, standing perfectly still while her bus pulled up, opened its doors, and then pulled away without her. She didn't seem frustrated or upset. She just stood there, head tilted slightly, as if listening to a fascinating secret, a placid smile on her face. Only after the bus was gone did she seem to wake up, shaking her head in mild confusion before sitting down on the bench. I saw a man in a business suit walking down the sidewalk. He walked 10 paces, stopped, turned a perfect 90 degrees to his right, paused for 3 seconds, turned back, and continued walking. He did it 3 times in the space of a single block. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just executing a series of commands. These were glitches in the human code. And they were getting more frequent. These people, these moments, they all shared the same unnerving quality I'd seen in Mrs. Gable, a profound lack of self-awareness. A serene vacancy. And then there was the hum. More people started mentioning it. "It's so loud today, isn't it?" a barista asked me, handing me a coffee. I heard nothing but the hiss of the espresso machine and the indie rock on the cafe speakers. "I love the hum in the morning," said a doorman, his eyes gazing at something over my shoulder. "It really clears the head." I started trying to hear it. I'd stand at intersections, close my eyes, and strain my ears past the traffic noise, past the city's normal symphony. Nothing. Just the absence of what they were hearing. Their shared hallucination. But I was starting to feel something else. It started in my hands. A low-grade vibration, transmitted from the asphalt through my tires and up the frame of my bike into the handlebars. At first, I thought it was just the road surface. But it was there on smooth, new pavement, too. A subtle, deep thrumming, so low it was more a feeling than a sound. I felt it in my feet when I stood at certain crosswalks, the ones with the most elaborate light shows. It was a pressure, a physical presence in the air, like the deep bass from a nightclub felt from 2 blocks away. One evening, I had a delivery to a house near Jericho Beach. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawns. As I pulled up, I saw the customer, a man in his 50s, standing in his driveway. He was holding a garden hose, spraying the concrete. But he wasn't moving the hose. He was just standing there, a statue, holding the nozzle in one position, a perfect, unchanging circle of water darkening the pavement. The rest of the driveway was bone dry. He just stood, watching the water pool and run off into the gutter, his expression one of intense, placid concentration. I got off my bike, the strange vibration from the street humming in the soles of my shoes. "Hello. Delivery for," I checked the name on my phone, "for David." He didn't turn. He just kept staring at the wet circle. "It has to be perfectly round," he murmured, not to me, but to the hose. "The frequency is very specific today." I stood there for a full minute, the thermal bag cooling on my back. The light at the corner of his street began to flicker. Short long. Short long. Short long. The water on the driveway gleamed with each pulse. The man didn't move. The hum in my feet felt stronger here, a resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate right up my spine. I left the food on his doorstep, rang the bell, and got on my bike. I rode away fast, not looking back. The rational explanations were failing me. The boxes I'd built to contain the strangeness were breaking apart. This wasn't a smart grid calibrating. This wasn't a TikTok trend. This wasn't mass hysteria. It was something else. It was quiet. It was creeping. And standing in that driveway, feeling that vibration in my bones while a man watered a perfect circle onto the ground, I felt for the first time that I was the one on the outside of the glass, looking in at a world that was slowly, calmly, and methodically going insane. The city was still breathing, but its rhythm was no longer its own. And I was no longer sure I was just an observer. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The world didn't change overnight. It seeped. The weirdness was no longer a spice in the soup of my daily routine, it was becoming the broth. The flickering lights were now a constant, a silent, coded language scrawled across the city that only I seemed to be reading. The patterns grew more complex, cascading from one intersection to the next, a wave of light rippling down Oak Street. I tried to film it on my phone, holding it up as I waited at a red light. But on playback, the flickers were gone. The video showed a perfectly normal, steady green light. I watched it 3 times, my heart sinking. The phone's camera, with its fixed shutter speed and digital processing, couldn't see it. It was happening in the spaces between the frames. It was happening only to the naked eye. My eye. My attempts to talk about it became exercises in futility. "Mark," I said one evening, trying to keep my voice casual. "Did you see the traffic on Granville today? Total mess." "Yeah," he grunted, his eyes glued to his monitor. He had a new obsession. Not his coursework. The birdless sky. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The silence is what I notice first. Not the profound, snow-blanketed silence of deep winter, but a threadbare quiet, a silence of omission. It began, I think, a month after Aiko died. I told myself it was a symptom of grief, a deafness of the soul. The world, robbed of her laughter, had simply muted itself in sympathy. I live in a small, 2-story house wedged in the neat, interlocking puzzle of suburban Osaka. For 30 years as a high school biology teacher, my days have been governed by bells and the frantic rustle of students. My mornings, however, were always governed by a different rhythm. The chittering of sparrows in the eaves. The guttural, commanding caw of the carrion crows that held court on the power lines. The distant, fluting call of a bush warbler from the small greenbelt behind the school. This was the city's orchestra, the constant, unassuming soundtrack to making coffee, reading the paper, and preparing for the day. Now, nothing. I stand on my small balcony, a cup of cooling tea in my hand, and I listen. The air carries the rumble of the first train on the Hankyu line, the drone of a delivery scooter down the street, the soft clatter of a neighbor opening their shutters. But the higher frequencies, the life that was once stitched into the fabric of the sky, are gone. The sky itself is a vast, empty blue canvas, unnervingly still. "It's too quiet," I said to Yumi last week. Aiko's younger sister has taken it upon herself to be my custodian, bringing over containers of stewed daikon and chiding me for not sorting the recycling correctly. She was wiping down my kitchen counter, a task she performed with the focused aggression of a surgeon. "Kenji-san, it's a Tuesday morning. What do you expect? A parade?" "No, not a parade." "The birds," I said, feeling foolish the moment the words left my mouth. "There are no birds." Yumi stopped wiping and looked at me, her brow furrowed with a practiced, gentle concern. It was the same look she'd given me at the funeral, the one that said, "The poor man is breakable." "Birds? What birds?" "Just, any of them. The sparrows. The crows from the shrine." She glanced out the window at the empty sky. "Maybe they migrated early this year." She turned back to me, her expression softening. You've been under a lot of stress. Perhaps you just haven't been noticing things. Or maybe you're noticing an absence. It's normal, Kenji-san. Your world is quieter now. Her logic was a comforting balm on a raw wound. Of course. That was it. My grief was so total it had scoured the world clean. I was projecting my internal silence onto the external world. I thanked her. And we talked of other things, the price of vegetables, her son's upcoming exams. But the explanation, as neat as it was, didn't quite fit. The first tear in that comforting logic came a few days later. I was walking home from the station, taking my usual route past the elementary school. A group of boys were playing in the yard, kicking a ball against a wall. The wall was adorned with a colorful, slightly faded mural of local wildlife, painted dragonflies, beetles, a family of tanuki. And in the corner, a large, stylized picture of a crow, its wings spread wide. One of the boys, chasing an errant kick, ran towards the mural. He stopped, cocked his head, and pointed. "Sensei," he called out to the teacher supervising them. "What's that pointy-beaked thing?" The teacher, a young woman I didn't recognize, walked over. She squinted at the crow. I'm not sure. Some kind of fantasy creature, maybe. From an old story." The boy shrugged and went back to his game. The teacher gave the mural one last puzzled look before turning away. I froze on the pavement. A fantasy creature. A crow. The most common, intelligent, and unavoidable creature in any Japanese city? It was absurd. A child's ignorance, perhaps. A new teacher unfamiliar with the local fauna. I walked on, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. That evening, I decided to seek concrete reassurance. I went to my study, the room Aiko had always said was more of a museum than an office. Bookshelves overflowed with textbooks, field guides, and scientific journals. I ran my fingers along the spines, the familiar titles a litany of my life's passion. Kansai Flora and Fauna. An Introduction to Entomology. The Avian Kingdom. I pulled out the latter. It was a hefty university textbook I'd used for 20 years, its cover softened with use. Biology of the Aves. I knew its contents by heart. I could picture the diagram of the Archaeopteryx fossil on page 12, the chart of beak adaptations on page 47, the stunning full-color plate of the Japanese kingfisher in the centerfold. I opened it. The title page read, "The Insect Kingdom, a Comprehensive Overview." My breath hitched. It was the wrong book. It had to be. Same publisher, same binding, same heft. But the wrong book entirely. I frantically flipped through the pages. Intricate drawings of beetle carapaces. The life cycle of the cicada. A detailed chapter on mimicry in stick insects. A section on advanced hive intelligence. It was a biology textbook, and an excellent one at that, but it was not the book I had owned for 2 decades. There was no mention of birds. Not a single feather, beak, or hollow bone. The word aves was nowhere to be found. I stumbled back from the bookshelf, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around the room, at the familiar clutter, the photo of Aiko on my desk, smiling from a bench in Nara Park, a place where deer and pigeons had once vied for tourists' crackers. Had I been so lost in my grief that I was losing my mind? Had I imagined an entire branch of the animal kingdom? I sank into my chair, the heavy book open on my lap. The silence of the house pressed in on me, no longer a symptom of sadness, but a presence. It was the silence of a void. The silence of a sky that had been emptied. The pages of the book before me felt definitive, absolute. They smelled of ink and paper and fact. And they told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was wrong. The birds had never been there at all. My attempts to rationalize began as a frantic mental scramble. It was a misprint. A special edition I'd forgotten buying. A practical joke of impossible cruelty and complexity. I spent an hour searching for the real book, pulling volumes from the shelf, checking behind rows, my hands shaking. Nothing. The next day at school, I walked into the biology prep room, a place that was my sanctuary. I went to the cabinet where we kept the teaching aids. I remembered a dusty, taxidermied sparrow, its glass eyes looking perpetually startled. I remembered a plastic case displaying different types of feathers. I remembered a poster of the skeletal structure of a pigeon. The cabinet was neat, organized. There were jars of preserved insects. Models of DNA helices, plastic replicas of human organs. But the sparrow was gone. The feather collection was gone. The poster of the pigeon skeleton had been replaced by a detailed chart of insect spiracles. My colleague, Mr. Ito, a chemistry teacher with a placid, moon-like face, walked in while I was staring at the empty space on the shelf. Looking for something, Tanaka-sensei, he asked, pouring himself a cup of green tea. I swallowed, my throat dry. The specimens. The ones we use for the evolution unit. The feathered ones. I couldn't bring myself to say the word. It felt dangerous now. Ito frowned. Feathered ones? Do you mean the fossil imprints? The Archaeopteryx? No, the modern examples. He took a slow sip of his tea, looking at me over the rim of the cup. Modern examples of what, Tanaka-sensei? Feathered animals. I think you've been spending too much time with the history department. Those are things from fantasy, like dragons. He chuckled, a soft, wheezing sound. You need a holiday. You're not sleeping well, are you? He wasn't being unkind. He was being logical. He was inhabiting a reality where what he said made perfect, unshakable sense. I was the one standing on shifting ground. I retreated to my classroom. I stood at the window, looking out over the athletic field. It was a perfect, cloudless day. The sky was a brilliant, uniform blue. An empty stage. My memory screamed that it was wrong, that the space above the neat white lines of the running track should be punctuated by the swooping flight of swallows, that the roof of the gymnasium should be lorded over by a parliament of crows. But there was nothing. Just air. The school bell rang, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the silence. Students began to file in, chattering, laughing, their world whole and intact. As I turned from the window to begin the day's lesson on photosynthesis, a terrifying thought took root in my mind, a thought far worse than simple grief-induced delusion. What if I wasn't the one who was wrong? What if the world was underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world began to feel like a photograph with a crucial element airbrushed out. The more I looked for the missing piece, the more seamless the forgery became. My initial panic congealed into a cold, methodical obsession. I was a biologist. I dealt in evidence. I would find proof. My first stop was the city library. It was a quiet, sunlit place that smelled of aging paper and floor wax. I felt a surge of hope. Here, in this repository of recorded knowledge, the truth must have survived. I navigated to the natural sciences section, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I ran my finger along the Dewey Decimal numbers. 580s for plants, 590s for animals. I found 595, arthropoda. 597, cold-blooded vertebrates. 599, mammalia. The section for 598, aves, was gone. It wasn't an empty shelf. The system was seamless. The shelf for 597 flowed directly into 599, the books packed tightly together as if they had always been neighbors. There was no gap, no hint of a removal. It was a clean, surgical excision. I approached the information desk. The librarian was a young woman with bright purple streaked hair, typing languidly at her computer. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a dry whisper. "I'm looking for books on ornithology." She blinked at me. "Orni what?" "Ornithology," I repeated, enunciating carefully. "The study of birds." She gave me a blank stare, then a small, pitying smile. "Is that a video game, sir? I can check the media section." "No," I said, my frustration rising. "It's a branch of zoology. Animals. With feathers. They fly." I flapped my hands in a weak, pathetic imitation of wings. Her smile tightened. It was the look Yumi had given me, the breakable man look. "Sir, I'm not familiar with that. We have books on bats, and of course, a very extensive collection on insects, if you're interested in flight." I walked away without another word. The library, once a source of comfort, now felt like an alien landscape. The rows of books seemed to mock me, their silent spines a united front of denial. My next attempt was the internet. The digital world, I reasoned, was too vast, too chaotic to be completely rewritten. There would be traces. An old blog post, a forgotten photo album, a cached web page from a decade ago. I went home and sat in my study, the book on insects still lying open on my desk like a sacred text from a religion I didn't believe in. I typed, "Torai," the Japanese word for bird, into the search bar. The results were a cascade of nonsense. Torai, a popular brand of yakitori seasoning, the irony was a physical blow. Torai, a character in a popular manga series. Torai, a slang term for an easy mark in a game. Torai no hane, bird feathers, the name for a type of shuttlecock used in badminton. I tried more specific terms. Suzum, sparrow. Karasu, crow. Hakucho, swan. Each search yielded the same kind of results, names of people, restaurants, fictional characters, obscure products. There were no nature documentaries, no encyclopedia entries, no photographs of animals. It was as if a keyword had been systematically reassigned across the entire global network. I dug deeper, using archaic search engines, trying to access cached pages. I found fragments, ghosts in the machine. A travel blog from 2008 describing a trip to Miyajima Island. The text read, "We fed the famous friendly deer, who were very bold and tried to eat my map." The whole area was so peaceful. I remembered that trip with Aiko. I remembered the deer, yes, but I also remembered the gulls crying overhead, swooping down to steal crackers from unwary tourists. They were missing from the account. The sentence just ended. My isolation became a physical thing, a glass wall between me and the rest of the world. Conversations became minefields. "It's a beautiful day," Yumi said one afternoon, sitting in my living room. "The sky is so clear." "It's empty," I replied before I could stop myself. "Empty?" She looked at me, her teacup paused halfway to her lips. "What a strange thing to say. It's full of sunshine." "Yumi," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Do you remember when we went to Himeji Castle? For the cherry blossoms? Your son, Kaito, he was only 5. He spent the whole afternoon chasing the pigeons." Yumi's face clouded with confusion. "Pigeons? Kenji-san, what are you talking about?" "Kaito was chasing the other children. I have the pictures. We can look at them." She pulled out her phone, her fingers swiping expertly across the screen. She found the album. There was Kaito, a small boy in a bright yellow hat, running across the castle grounds. He was laughing, his arms outstretched. He was running towards other children. The sky behind him was a perfect, unbroken blue. The flagstones of the courtyard were clean. There were no birds. "See," she said gently. "No, pigeons. You're mixing up your memories." I stared at the screen. I could see the scene in my mind's eye so clearly, the frantic flutter of gray wings, the bobbing heads, Kaido's squeals of delight. The memory was as real to me as the chair I was sitting on. But the phone in her hand showed a different world, a different past. "I need you to see Dr. Abe," she said softly, putting her phone away. "Just to talk." For the grief. I didn't answer. I knew then that I could never speak of it again. Not to her. Not to anyone. To them, I was unwell, lost in bereavement. To me, they were all sleepwalking. I began a journal, a secret testament. I bought a simple, lockable diary and a new pen. At night, I would sit in my study and write. I described the iridescent sheen of a crow's feathers. I tried to transcribe the complex song of the nightingale. I drew crude sketches of different beak shapes, wingspans, talons. I wrote down memories of Aiko, specifically memories that involved birds. Her delight at spotting a rare wagtail by the river. The way she would scold the crows for stealing garbage. These memories were my anchors, the only proof I had that I wasn't adrift in a sea of madness. The journal became my most prized possession, the last bastion of a forgotten reality. And then, the nights changed. It started about 3 weeks into my secret investigation. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying another fruitless day of searching. The silence of the house was absolute. And then I heard it. It was faint, so faint I thought it was tinnitus, a phantom sound generated by my own auditory nerves. A high, thin, whistling note. Pi pi pi. The call of a Japanese pygmy woodpecker. I sat bolt upright, my heart seizing. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Had I imagined it? I strained my ears, focusing on the quality of the quiet. And there it was again, from a different direction. Ho 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 kikio. A bush warbler. The sound was thin, ethereal, like a recording played from a great distance. I scrambled out of bed and went to the window, sliding it open. The night air was cool. The suburban landscape was a patchwork of dark roofs and the sodium-orange glow of streetlights. The sound was still there, a ghost symphony in the air. It wasn't coming from a specific tree or rooftop. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, woven into the very fabric of the night's silence. I had to be sure. I grabbed my phone, my hands clumsy with excitement, and opened the voice recorder app. I held it out the window, pointing it towards the empty sky. I stood there for 5 minutes, shivering in the cool air, listening to the impossible chorus. The calls were intermittent, overlapping, a sparrow's chirp, a dove's coo, the sharp cry of a kite. It was a cacophony of ghosts. I came back inside and played the recording. Hisses. Nothing. Only the low, ambient hum of the city and the faint static of the phone's microphone. The birdsong was not on the recording. It was only in my head. Or, worse, it was only for me. This began my new routine. Every night, I would wait for the world to fall asleep, and I would listen. Sometimes the sounds were clear. Other times they were distorted, warped, as if heard through water. I started taking walks, following the phantom chorus through the sleeping streets. I must have looked like a madman, a widower wandering aimlessly in his pajamas, his head cocked as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. The walks were always fruitless. The sound never grew stronger in any particular direction. It was a field, a constant presence that I had somehow tuned into. But these nocturnal excursions yielded a new, unsettling observation. The streetlights. They were supposed to be steady, burning with a constant orange glow. But lately, they had started to flicker. Not the random flicker of a dying bulb, but something rhythmic, patterned. Short long short. A pause. Long long short. It was like a code being tapped out across the entire neighborhood grid, a silent, luminous conversation just at the edge of my perception. I wrote it down in my journal, the patterns of light next to the remembered songs of the dead. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt connected. The silent sky, the ghost sounds, the talking lights. It was a new syntax for a world that no longer made sense. And I was the only one trying to learn its grammar. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My search for external validation had failed. The world had sealed its reality against me. So, I turned inward, to the last place evidence might be hiding, my own digital archives. On a shelf in my study sat a collection of old external hard drives, a graveyard of obsolete technology containing years of lesson plans, student records, and personal files. It took me an entire afternoon to find the right cables to connect one of the older, clunkier models to my modern laptop. As the drive whirred to life, I felt a flicker of the academic excitement I hadn't experienced in years. I sifted through folders of vacation photos and downloaded research papers. Most of the papers were useless, their text conforming to the new reality. A treatise on insect migration patterns had replaced one I distinctly remembered being about geese. But then I found it. It wasn't even a full paper, just a set of saved notes and a few scanned pages from an obscure, out-of-print book published in the 1970s. The title of the chapter was Conceptual Anchor Theory, by a German physicist named Erich Thorn. I had no memory of saving it. Perhaps it was for a cross-disciplinary project ICO had been working on. I began to read, and the world tilted on its axis. Thorn's theory was radical, bordering on philosophical. He proposed that reality, at a quantum level, was not fixed but probabilistic, a sea of potential states. What solidified this potential into the concrete, consensus reality we experience, he argued, was collective consciousness. Shared knowledge, language, and memory acted as conceptual anchors, holding the world in a stable form. If an anchor were to be removed, if a widely held concept were to be somehow erased from the collective mind, reality itself would reconfigure around the absence, smoothing over the gap so seamlessly that the change would be undetectable to those within the new consensus. The past would literally rewrite itself. Physical evidence, books, photographs, digital data, all would conform to the new baseline. The last scanned page contained a terrifying, heavily underlined passage: the most vulnerable anchors are those which are ubiquitous but not fundamental to survival. A concept like gravity or water is too deeply embedded. But a concept that exists purely in a sensory or aesthetic space, one that could be removed without causing immediate systemic collapse, could theoretically be targeted. The subjects of the consensus would experience no sense of loss. They would simply inhabit a reality where the excised concept had never existed. Only a consciousness resistant to the shift, an outlier, a mind anchored to the old reality by intense personal association or trauma, would perceive the discrepancy. For such an individual, the world would become a constant, undeniable act of gaslighting. I leaned back, my breath shallow. It wasn't a virus, or a toxin, or an alien invasion. It was a subtraction. A conceptual heist on a global scale. Someone, or something, had stolen the birds from our collective mind, and reality had dutifully erased them. My grief, my 30 years as a biologist, my memories of Aiko watching the sky, these were my intense personal associations. They had made my consciousness an island, a stubborn resistor to the tidal shift that had swept everyone else away. The ghost sounds at night took on a new meaning. They weren't my imagination. They were echoes. The universe, Thorne's theory suggested, might have a kind of inertia. The birds weren't truly gone, how could they be? Their matter, their energy, had to go somewhere. They had been pushed out of consensus reality, relegated to a probabilistic phantom zone. I was hearing the resonant frequency of a reality that no longer officially existed. This new, terrifying understanding changed the texture of my days. The empty sky no longer felt merely silent, it felt stripped. The world seemed thinner, like a single coat of paint over a much more complex and vibrant mural. I began to notice other, smaller absences. The overabundance of spiders, their webs hanging thick and undisturbed on every telephone pole. A plague of caterpillars chewing through the rose bushes in my garden, with nothing to keep them in check. The ecology of my suburb was quietly, subtly unraveling. These were the consequences, the loose threads left by the great subtraction. My nocturnal walks became more focused. The flickering streetlights seemed more insistent, their coded messages more complex. I started to see things, or, rather, almost see things. In my peripheral vision, a sudden, swift movement against a windowpane that was gone when I turned. A dark shape perched on a distant roof that dissolved into a chimney pot when I squinted. They were like afterimages burned onto my retina, visual echoes of the vanished world. One afternoon, seeking refuge from my own thoughts, I visited the local Shinto shrine, a small, peaceful oasis of ancient cryptomeria trees and moss-covered stones. An elderly woman was sweeping the stone path with a bamboo broom, her movements slow and ritualistic. She was one of the shrine's volunteer caretakers, a woman I recognized from the neighborhood. I approached her cautiously. "A beautiful day," I offered. She nodded, not pausing in her sweeping. "The air is clean." "It used to be noisier here," I said, testing the waters. "I remember a time when the great trees were full of chatter." She stopped sweeping and looked up at the vast, bare branches of the central camphor tree. A flicker of something crossed her face, not confusion, but something older, like a half-forgotten dream. "Ah," she said, her voice raspy with age. "You mean the sky spirits. My grandmother used to talk of them. She said they had voices like tiny bells and cloaks of all colors. She said they carried prayers to the heavens." My heart leaped. Yes. The sky spirits. Where did they go? The woman's eyes unfocused. The brief light of memory faded, replaced by a placid emptiness. She looked back at me, her expression resetting to one of polite neutrality. Sky spirits? My goodness, what an imagination. Those are just old folk tales for children. Are you feeling all right, sir? You look pale. She turned back to her sweeping, the conversation over, the door she had momentarily opened swinging shut and locking from the inside. I had found an ally, a fellow resistor, for a fleeting 30 seconds. And then the consensus had reclaimed her, smoothing over the crack in her reality, dismissing her own memory as fantasy. The encounter left me more profoundly alone than ever. The contagion wasn't just a loss of memory, it was an active, self-policing system. It could find and patch the holes. The escalation came a week later. The nightly birdsong, the ghost chorus, grew louder, more frantic. It was no longer a faint, distant symphony. It sounded close, desperate. The calls were sharp, insistent, as if the singers were pressed right against the thin veil of my reality, trying to claw their way back through. The flickering of the streetlights became more agitated, the patterns faster, almost strobing. One night, the sound was so intense I couldn't stay indoors. It was a cacophony of shrieks and whistles, a billion voices crying out from the void. I walked out onto my balcony, my hands gripping the railing. As I stared into the darkness, a flicker in my peripheral vision became something more. For a single, heart-stopping second, the streetlight across the road did not just flicker. It went out completely. And in the perfect, sudden darkness, I saw it. The silhouette of a large owl, wings spread, perched on the crossbar of the telephone pole. It was not a ghost or an afterimage. It was solid, real, a whole of absolute black against the slightly less black sky. It turned its head, and I saw the faint glint of two massive eyes. Then the streetlight flickered back on, and it was gone. The crossbar was empty. I stumbled back into my house, my body trembling. They weren't just echoes. They were still there. And they were trying to get back in. Or perhaps, something was trying to let them in. And the thought that followed, cold and sharp, was, what would happen to the world, to the minds of everyone else, if the sky suddenly, impossibly, filled up again? What happens to a forgery when the original is held up right next to it? Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The experience with the owl broke something in me. The ghost chorus was no longer a phenomenon to be studied but a summons. It pulled at me, a constant, urgent pressure behind my eyes. For the next 2 nights, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, the book on insects open before me, its factual certainty a bizarre counterpoint to the screaming impossibility I heard in the air. The sounds were converging, the chaotic symphony resolving into a single, piercing note that seemed to emanate from a specific point in the landscape. It was a homing beacon, and it was calling me. On the 3rd night, I couldn't bear it any longer. I put on my coat, locked the door to my silent house, and walked out into the orange-lit streets. I didn't need to navigate, the sound was my guide. It led me away from the neat grid of my neighborhood, past the darkened school, and towards the Kanzaki River, its black water reflecting the coated flickering of the lights along its banks. My feet knew the way. It was the path Aiko and I had walked 100 times. It led to a small, secluded municipal park nestled in a bend of the river. It was her favorite place. She loved the little wooden bridge that crossed over a stagnant pond and the cluster of willows that wept over the water's edge. This was where she had set up her easel to paint, and where we had once spent a whole afternoon watching a brilliant blue kingfisher dive for minnows. As I stepped through the park's entrance gate, the sound reached a deafening crescendo. It was a physical force, vibrating in my teeth, in the bones of my skull. It was the sound of a million wings beating against a glass wall. The streetlights at the park's edge began to strobe violently, their flashes illuminating impossible things in the darkness, a fleeting wing beat, the curve of a feathered back, a shape diving through the air. I walked towards the center of the park, towards the pond and the little wooden bridge. This was the epicenter. The source. I stood at the edge of the pond, my breath misting in the cold air, and looked at my reflection in the dark, still water. A haggard, tired old man, haunted and alone. And then, it stopped. The overwhelming sound vanished, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like the world had lost its breath. The strobing lights went still. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a single, pure note. Chio chio bi. The song of a Japanese bush warbler, clear as crystal, coming from the willow tree right beside me. I looked up. The world snapped into focus. It was as if a filter had been lifted from my eyes, a plug removed from my ears. The willow was alive with the flitting shapes of warblers. The sky, which I had thought was black, was revealed to be a deep, pre-dawn indigo, and it was filled with the swirling, swooping forms of hundreds of swallows. From the direction of the shrine, a chorus of guttural caws rose as a flock of crows took to the air, their black forms stark against the lightning sky. The air was thick with sound, with life, with movement. Sparrows chattered in the bushes. A pair of doves cooed from the roof of the park's small pavilion. I could hear the powerful whoosh of their wings. I could smell the damp, earthy scent of the riverbank, a scent I hadn't noticed in months. Tears streamed down my face. It was all here. It had all been here, all along. Thorne's theory was right. The birds hadn't gone anywhere. They had been pushed into a perceptual layer, a pocket of reality just adjacent to our own. My stubborn, grief-stricken memory, my biologist's mind, had acted like a key, and this place, so saturated with Aiko's love for them and my memories of her, was the lock. I saw the flash of iridescent blue. On a low-hanging branch over the pond, the kingfisher was back. It sat, proud and impossibly vibrant, before diving, a perfect sapphire arrow breaking the surface of the water. This was my confrontation. Not with a monster or an enemy, but with reality itself. A choice stood before me, stark and clear in the burgeoning dawn. I could let go. I could accept the silence. I could release my grip on Aiko's memory, on the 30 years of knowledge that had become my burden. I could let the conceptual anchor slip. The world would snap back to the consensus. The birds would vanish again, perhaps forever this time, and I would be at peace. I would be like Yumi, like Mr. Ito, like the old woman at the shrine. I could rejoin the human race in their quiet, orderly, birdless world. My grief would ease. My madness would recede. I would be sane, and whole, and normal. Or I could hold on. I could choose to remember. I could choose this vibrant, noisy, glorious reality. I could stay here, on this island of memory, and be the sole guardian of a forgotten truth. I would be forever isolated, a ghost in a world that denied my most fundamental perceptions. I would be the madman, the broken widower. But I would not be alone. I would have the sky spirits. I would have the kingfisher. I would have the memory of Aiko's smile as she watched them. A memory that was now a living, breathing thing. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale golden light over the scene. The kingfisher emerged from the pond with a wriggling minnow in its beak and flew off, a streak of impossible color. I sat down on the familiar wooden bench by the water. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm that was not resignation, but decision. The sounds of the world washed over me, the lapping of the water, the rustle of the wind, and above it all, the symphony of the sky. I don't know how long I sat there. When I finally opened my eyes again, the sun was higher. The light had a flat, thin quality to it. The air was silent, save for the distant hum of city traffic. The willow tree was still. The sky was a blank, empty blue. I was back in their world. But something had changed. I stood up and began the walk home. As I passed beneath the camphor tree, I heard it. Faint, but clear. Pi pi pi. I smiled. A small, private smile. They hadn't truly gone. I hadn't let them. I had made my choice. I had walked out of the park, but I had not left the island. I had simply learned how to see both shores at once. My life now exists in two realities. To everyone else, I am Kenji Tanaka, the quiet, eccentric widower, a biology teacher who sometimes pauses in the middle of a sentence, his head cocked as if listening to a distant sound no one else can hear. They see me smile at an empty sky, and they shake their heads with pity. But in my reality, the one I have chosen to keep, I am never alone. I am the custodian of a secret world. The crows greet me from the rooftops on my way to school. The sparrows chatter to me from invisible perches. And sometimes, on a clear evening by the river, if I stand very still and remember the exact shade of Aiko's coat on a winter's day, I can see a flash of impossible blue dive into the water. I don't know what stole the birds. A technology, a mass delusion, a shift in the very laws of the universe, it doesn't matter. The why is unknowable. What matters is the memory. What matters is the choice. I live in a birdless world, but I am the only one who can still hear the sky sing. And it is a beautiful, heartbreaking, and glorious song. The quiet contagion, the gray spot. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with a lie the color gray told. My life in Manchester was a curated collection of sharp angles and soft focus. I had my flat in a refurbished mill in Ancoats, all exposed brick and drafty windows that rattled when the tram went by. I had my job at Grind and Found, a coffee shop so achingly hip it sold single-origin pour-overs and vinyl records. And I had my camera, a hefty, second-hand Canon that felt like an extension of my own eye. I moved here from Bristol to escape the ghost of a dead relationship, and I was rebuilding myself one photograph at a time. I captured the rust on canal locks, the defiant weeds in cobbled alleyways, the way the low sun turned the glass of Beetham Tower to molten gold. My photography was about finding the truth in the texture of things. The gray spot lived on Palmer Street, a forgotten artery connecting the shiny new northern quarter with the stubborn, grimy heart of old Manchester. Palmer Street was a battleground of gentrification. Half of it was boarded up takeaways and a laundromat with a sun-bleached sign, the other half was artisan bakeries and studios for creatives. The gray spot was on the old side, a patch of pavement right in front of the sparkling Suds laundromat. It wasn't concrete, or tarmac, or stone. It was simply gray. A flat, matte, light-devouring gray. It was about the size of a dinner plate, a slightly irregular oval. The first time I noticed it, I was hunting for urban decay to immortalize. I stopped, frowning. It looked like a hole in the world that had been carelessly photoshopped. There was no texture to it, no grit, no tiny cracks, no discoloration from rain or dirt. When the drizzle started, the pavement around it darkened to slate, but the spot remained unchanged, pristine and utterly blank. Weird bit of paving, that, I said to myself, raising my camera. I framed the shot. Wanting to capture the contrast between the spot's unnatural smoothness and the cracked, gum-stained concrete around it. I zoomed in, adjusted the focus. The focus assist light flickered erratically. I pressed the shutter. The camera whirred, clicked, and then the screen went black for a second before flashing an error message, corrupt data. Unable to save image. I grunted in frustration. Bloody memory card. I popped it out, blew on the contacts, the universal tech support ritual, and slotted it back in. I tried again. Same result. I switched to my phone. The image on the screen looked strange, pixelated around the gray area as if the sensor couldn't process it. I took the picture. When I looked in my gallery, it was a garbled mess of green and purple lines, a digital scream. I dismissed it. A freak magnetic field from the laundromat's ancient machinery, maybe. A weird chemical spill that messed with electronics. I had coffee to make. Over the next week, Palmer Street became part of my commute. I'd walk a little out of my way just to look at the spot. I never saw anyone step on it. People would approach, their path taking them directly over it, and then, at the last second, they'd make a subtle, unconscious course correction. A slight veering to the left or right, as fluid and natural as water flowing around a stone. They never looked down. They just avoided it. Liam, my only real friend in the city and my long-suffering coworker, was not impressed. I brought it up over the hiss of the milk steamer. There's this patch of pavement, I began, trying to sound casual. On Palmer Street. It's weird. It's like it's not really there. He topped a latte with a perfect rosetta. Right, Elara. A phantom pavement. Is this going to be one of your art projects? Metaphysical municipal works? No, I'm serious. My camera can't take a picture of it. It corrupts the file. It's an old Canon you bought off a bloke in a pub. It's probably got more ghosts in it than the rover's return. And your phone's screen is cracked to hell. It's tech, L. It fails. He slid the latte across the counter. Order for Sarah. His dismissal was so reasonable it made me feel foolish. He was right. It was a weird bit of resurfacing, and my gear was old. And people avoiding a patch of pavement? Coincidence. Urban life is full of tiny, inexplicable rituals. Then I saw the tapper. He was one of the city's shuffling ghosts, a man with a wild beard and a coat that seemed to be holding on by memory alone. I saw him walking down Palmer Street, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He didn't have the subconscious radar of the other pedestrians. His worn boot came down squarely in the middle of the gray spot. He stopped. His whole body went rigid for a second. I paused, watching from across the street. He didn't stumble or look down. He just stood there. Then, his right hand came up, fingers slightly curled, and he began to tap. Not on anything, just in the air in front of his chest. Tap. Tap tap. Tap. It was a precise, complex rhythm. His eyes were unfocused. He muttered something, too low for me to hear. It looked like a nervous tick, but it had a strange deliberation to it, a structure. After about 10 seconds, he stopped, shook his head as if clearing a fog, and shuffled on, leaving me standing in the light Manchester rain with a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. The man was clearly unwell. He had his own troubles, his own compulsions. Stepping on a weird bit of pavement was just a coincidence. But I had seen his foot land. I had seen him stop. I had seen the tapping begin. The next day, I brought a sketchbook. If the camera couldn't see it, maybe my hand could. I sat on a low wall opposite, the smell of damp brick and traffic fumes thick in the air. I sketched the street, the cracked window of the laundromat, the faded graffiti on the brickwork. Then I focused on the spot. I tried to draw its nothingness. I shaded, I cross-hatched, I smudged the graphite with my thumb. But no matter what I did, I couldn't capture it. My drawing just looked like a gray circle on a page. It didn't have the void-like quality of the real thing. It didn't feel wrong. Frustrated, I stared at it, trying to burn the image into my mind. A woman with a pram swerved around it. A teenager on a scooter hopped off, ran it around the spot, and hopped back on. A businessman, phone pressed to his ear, made a sharp 90-degree turn to walk around it before correcting his path. The unease was no longer ignorable. It was a low hum beneath the noise of the city, a signal I was somehow tuned into. I started keeping a journal, a small black moleskine. October 14th, saw the gray spot again. Tried to photograph it with a brand new disposable camera. The film came back from the developer with a milky, burned out patch where the spot should have been. The chemist looked at me funny. He said it looked like a light leak, but only on that one frame. October 17th, saw another tapper. A young woman in a sharp suit. She clipped the edge of the spot with her heel, froze for a second, then started rubbing her thumb and forefinger together in a repetitive, circular motion. She did it for 3 blocks before I lost her in the crowd at Piccadilly Gardens. October 21st, Liam thinks I'm getting obsessive. He told me I look tired. He said maybe I should take a break from my creepy pavement project. He doesn't get it. He just sees concrete. I see a stain that's spreading, even though it's not getting any bigger. The stain was in my head. I'd see it when I closed my eyes, a perfect, textureless gray void. I started noticing numbers. The tapper's rhythm, 1, 2, 1, 1. The woman's thumb rubbing, a constant, smooth figure 8. The number of steps people took to get around the spot. I found myself counting the drips from a leaky pipe, the flashes of a pedestrian crossing light, the beats between tram announcements. The world was resolving into patterns, and the gray spot was the key. One evening, after closing up the shop, I walked to Palmer Street with a new sense of purpose. It was late, the street deserted. The orange glow of the streetlights gave the scene a theatrical quality. The spot was there, a patch of utter blackness in the artificial light. I carried a small bag of flour. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was stupid. This was crazy. But I had to know. I stood at the edge of the spot and gently, carefully, sprinkled a fine white layer over it. The flour just vanished. It didn't land. It didn't settle. It fell towards the gray surface and, about a centimeter above it, it simply ceased to be. Not blown away, not absorbed. It was there one moment, a stream of white powder, and then it was gone. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the last grains disappeared into nothing, leaving the gray spot as clean and void as ever. I scrambled backwards, dropping the bag, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a patch of pavement. It wasn't a surface. It was a hole. A hole in the shape of a paving stone. A quiet, patient, hungry little hole in the middle of my city. And I had the sickening feeling that I was the only one who had noticed. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The flower incident shifted my obsession into a state of low-grade, constant dread. The world hadn't changed, but my perception of it had fractured. I was living in two cities simultaneously. There was Manchester, the vibrant, rain-slicked, noisy place everyone else saw. And then there was my Manchester, a city with a spreading infection, a place where the fundamental rules of physics were fraying at the edges. My journal became my sanctuary and my tormentor. I filled it with frantic sketches, maps, and timelines. October 28th. I think there's another one. In the alleyway behind the Mackey Mayer Market Hall. It's smaller, the size of a loose brick. I saw a street cleaner sweep his broom right over it. The bristles seemed to stutter in mid-air, just for a fraction of a second. He frowned, shook the broom, and carried on. I tried to photograph it. Same result. November 2nd. I saw the tapper again. His rhythm is more complex now. It's not just his hand. His head jerks in time with it. Tap tap. Jerk. Tap. Jerk jerk. He was muttering numbers. 7. 4. 1. 7. 4. 1. Over and over. He wasn't looking at anything. His eyes were like dusty glass. November 5th, bonfire night. Fireworks exploding over the cathedral. Everyone looking up. I was looking down. I found a third spot, a thin gray line like a crack, running along the base of a new glass-fronted apartment building near Angel Meadow. The architecture is part of it. It prefers the new, the sterile. It's a parasite feeding on gentrification. My isolation deepened. I tried to show Liam my journal, my maps marking the locations of the spots with little red X's. He sat opposite me in our staff room, the smell of stale coffee grounds hanging in the air. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from amusement to genuine concern. "Ilara," he said, his voice soft, gentle. It was worse than if he'd shouted. "This is a lot. You're not sleeping, are you? All this, the numbers, the non-Euclidean paving slabs, it sounds like you're under a hell of a lot of stress." "It's real, Liam." I sprinkled flour on it. It disappeared. Maybe the wind blew it away. Maybe it fell into a crack you couldn't see. He pushed the journal back across the table. "I think you should talk to someone. A professional. You moved here to get away from a bad situation. Maybe some of that is, I don't know, catching up with you." I stared at him. He wasn't mocking me. He was scared for me. In his reality, his sane, solid Manchester, a friend obsessing over malevolent pavement was a symptom of a breakdown. The chasm between us felt a mile wide. He was on one side, in the light, and I was on the other, staring into a gray void that only I could see. "You think I'm losing my mind," I said, my voice flat. "I think you need a break," he corrected, but we both knew what he meant. After that, I stopped talking about it. At work, I was quiet, efficient. I frothed milk, wiped counters, and smiled at customers, all the while feeling like a spy in a foreign land. My photography changed. I stopped trying to capture beauty. Now, I documented the strange behavior. I'd sit in cafes for hours, using a long lens to photograph people from a distance. The man who would stop mid-sentence to trace a perfect square in the air with his finger. The woman on the tram who compulsively smoothed the fabric of her coat, always in patterns of 3. They were the touched. Most had a vacant, placid look in their eyes. They weren't distressed. They were just executing a program. My research became my entire life outside of work. I fell down internet rabbit holes, my laptop screen glowing in my dark flat until 3 a.m. I searched for sensory dead zones, urban glitches, architectural anomalies. I found mostly new age nonsense about ley lines and conspiracy theories about 5G towers. But buried deep within a decaying GeoCities era website about psychogeography, I found a post from 2003. The author, a user named Orion_Stargazer, described a phenomenon in Sheffield. He wrote about areas of non-perception and lacunae in the urban fabric. He mentioned a specific corner where compasses would spin and photographs would blur. The post was rambling, filled with jargon about non-Euclidean geometry and the city as a conscious entity. Most of it was impenetrable. But one line leapt out at me. The city is updating its firmware. The old code is being patched over. We are the bugs in the new system. There was an email address at the bottom of the page. It was a long shot, but I wrote to it, my hands shaking. I told them about the gray spots, the corrupted photos, the tappers, the numbers. I poured all the paranoia and fear from my journal into that one desperate message. I hit send, expecting nothing. While I waited, a subplot to my own quiet horror story began to unfold. A series of small, seemingly insignificant thefts were happening in the neighborhood. Not burglaries, but bizarre pilferings. Someone stole all the letter O's from the sign of the local bookshop. All the left shoes from the donation bin outside the Oxfam. A dozen identical garden gnomes from a single street. The police were baffled and uninterested. It was weird, but it was trivial. To me, however, it felt connected. It was a breakdown in logic, another symptom of the same disease. It was the world's syntax becoming corrupted. 2 weeks passed. I had almost forgotten about the email. Then, a reply appeared in my inbox. The sender's name was simply A. Subject, the lacunae. Miss Vance. You are not imagining things. Do not use your camera. Do not attempt to physically interact with the sites. You are observing a transcoding process. The substrate is being rewritten. Your camera, a device for capturing the old code, cannot parse the new language. It results in a logical paradox, hence the corruption. They are not random. They are nodes. You have found 3. There are more. They form a pattern. Look at the old maps. Look at what was there before the glass and steel. If you wish to understand, meet me. The Portico Library. Thursday. 3 p.m. Come alone. Do not speak of this to anyone else. They are not equipped to understand, and their disbelief is a form of static that can be dangerous. A. The Portico Library. A private subscription library, a relic of Georgian Manchester tucked away near St. Anne's Square. I felt a surge of electrifying terror and, for the first time in months, a sliver of hope. I wasn't alone. Someone else saw it. Someone else knew. The thefts continued. Someone stole all the doorknobs from one side of a residential street. Just the brass ones. It was a red herring, I told myself, a distraction. It had to be. My problem was bigger, more fundamental. But the nagging feeling remained, it was all part of the same quiet unraveling. On Thursday, I pushed open the heavy door of the Portico Library and stepped into a world of hushed silence, polished wood, and the intoxicating scent of old paper. A man was sitting at a table in the corner, a collection of antique maps spread out before him. He was elderly, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were startlingly alert, like a hawk's. He looked up as I approached, and a thin smile touched his lips. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I am Arthur. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. We have much to discuss about the city's new architecture." He gestured to the map in front of him. It was a surveyor's map of Manchester from the 1880s. With a long, bony finger, he tapped a spot. "Palmer Street," he said. "Site of a public well. Long since filled in." He moved his finger. "Behind the old market. A plague pit." His finger moved again, to Angel Meadow. "A workhouse, demolished in 1928. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a fierce, academic light. They are not placing the nodes randomly, you see. They are anchoring them to points of historical weight. Erasure and replacement. It is all very logical. I stared at him, my heart pounding. He understood. He had a theory. The word "they" hung in the air between us, full of terrifying possibility. Who are they? I whispered. Arthur smiled again, a conspiratorial, almost joyful expression on his face. That, my dear, he said, leaning forward, is the great and terrible question. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Arthur became my guide into the abyss. He was a retired professor of urban studies from the University of Manchester, and he had been tracking these anomalies for almost a decade. He wasn't a herald of some alien invasion or a believer in the supernatural. His theory was colder, more terrifying in its sterile logic. Think of reality as a vast, complex piece of software, he explained during one of our hushed meetings in the library's dusty corners. Our city, our world, is the user interface, organic, messy, full of redundant code and inefficient processes. What you are witnessing, Elara, is a root-level update. A new operating system is being installed over the old one. The gray spots are the initialization points, the command prompts. They are not matter. They are pure information. His words were both a comfort and a source of profound horror. He gave my fear a name, a transcoding process, but the implication was that humanity was nothing more than legacy data, due to be overridden. He tasked me with being his field agent. My obsession was now legitimized, given purpose. Armed with his antique maps and my own knack for noticing the unnoticed, I found more spots. A gray smear on the steps of the central library. A perfect gray circle in the middle of a pedestrian bridge over the Medlock. A flickering patch of grayness on a digital billboard in Piccadilly Gardens that caused the advertisements to dissolve into static whenever they passed over it. Each time I found one, I would report its location to Arthur. He would excitedly cross-reference it with his historical maps, finding a lost chapel, a forgotten slum, a site of industrial accident. A pattern was emerging on his master chart, a sprawling, geometric web laid over the city. The touched were becoming more numerous, their behaviors more synchronized. One afternoon, sitting outside a cafe in the northern quarter, I watched as 3 separate people, all strangers to each other, stopped at the exact same moment. One was a bike courier, one an elderly woman with a shopping trolley, one a young student. For a full 30 seconds, they stood frozen. Then, in perfect unison, they all raised their left hands and traced the same intricate, 5-pointed shape in the air before continuing on their way as if nothing had happened. It was no longer a random tick. It was a network. A silent, coordinated prayer to an invisible God. The mystery of the petty thefts was solved, not by the police, but by me. Following a hunch, I went to one of the new spots I'd found, in a small park near the university. Tucked behind a bench, almost hidden, was a small pile of objects, a single left Nike trainer, the brass letter O, a garden gnome, and a brass doorknob. It wasn't theft for gain. The touched were being compelled to collect objects that fit a certain, unknowable criteria, perhaps items that were redundant or illogical, and deposit them like offerings at the nodes. It was the tidying up of reality's clutter. The true escalation came on a wet Tuesday night. I was walking home, my collar turned up against the wind, when I saw it. On the top step leading to the communal entrance of my mill conversion apartment building. A gray spot. My blood ran cold. It wasn't out there anymore. It wasn't an abstract horror I could observe from a safe distance. It was on my doorstep. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking my hair, staring at it. It was small, no bigger than my palm, but it radiated a profound silence that seemed to swallow the sound of the nearby tram. My key trembled in my hand. I couldn't step on it. I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that if I did, something in me would be rewritten. I would start tapping. I would start tracing patterns. I would start counting. I backed away and circled the building, fumbling for the rear entrance by the bins. My safe space, my curated haven of brick and wood, felt contaminated. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the refrigerator sounded different, flatter, more monotonous. The shadows cast by the streetlights through my large window seemed to stretch and bend at odd angles when I wasn't looking directly at them. The contagion was seeping through the walls. My trust in Arthur began to fray. His excitement about the process was becoming unsettling. He spoke of it with the detached admiration of a naturalist observing a beautiful and deadly predator. "It's elegant, isn't it?" he said, when I told him about the synchronized tracing. "No chaos, no wasted energy. Pure, efficient communication. They are learning a new language." "They're not learning, Arthur, they're being programmed." I hissed, my voice echoing in the library's hallowed quiet. "And one of those things is outside my door." He peered at me over his spectacles, and for the first time, I saw something other than academic curiosity in his eyes. It was a kind of pity. "The process must expand, Elara. It is inevitable. You cannot stand on the shore and command the tide to stop. You can only learn to swim." The breaking point came a week later. Arthur called me, his voice crackling with an energy I had never heard before. "I have it. The focal point. The keystone of the new architecture. It's magnificent. The geometry is perfect. I need you to confirm it, Elara. You are the only one I trust to see it clearly." He gave me an address. It was a new building, a sleek, brutalist block of concrete and glass that housed a data center on the edge of Salford Keys. It was a place with no history, a monument to the digital age. It didn't fit his theory of historical anchors. When I got there, the feeling of wrongness was overwhelming. The air itself felt thin, static charged. Several people were standing near the building's entrance, unnervingly still. They weren't tappers or tracers. They were just waiting. Their heads were tilted slightly, as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. I called Arthur. "I'm here." "It feels bad, Arthur." "What am I looking for?" "The main entrance," he said, his voice giddy. "The entire threshold. It's the largest node yet. A gateway." I theorized that. He was cut off by a sound on his end of the line. A soft, rhythmic clicking. Click. Click click. Click. My stomach plunged. It wasn't the sound of a phone line. It was a tapping sound. A deliberate, structured rhythm. "Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is that noise?" There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Placid. Devoid of his earlier excitement. "It is the sound of logic, my dear," he said calmly. "The sound of the code compiling. It is so very beautiful. I should have embraced it sooner. All my maps, my theories. I was trying to read the cover of a book I should have just opened. You should open it too, Elara. Just step through the door." I looked at the glass doors of the data center. The entire entranceway, the tiled floor, the steps, it wasn't reflecting the gray sky properly. It was a vast, shimmering expanse of that familiar, light-devouring gray. The people stood before it like parishioners at an altar. Arthur hadn't been an ally. He wasn't a researcher fighting against the anomaly. He was its first priest. He hadn't been using me to map a threat, he'd been using me to confirm his faith. My discoveries, my fear, my desperation, it was all just data for his terrifying new religion. He wasn't trying to stop it. He was worshipping its arrival. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I was utterly, completely alone. The one person who understood was not just an ally proven false, he was a willing convert, a voice from the other side. The system wasn't just overriding the city. It was recruiting. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the gray threshold and its silent, waiting congregation. I turned and ran, the sound of Arthur's placid voice and the rhythmic clicking echoing in my head, a promise of the silence to come. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. My flight from Salford Keys was not a solution, merely a postponement. Running was a legacy action, an old-world response to a new-world problem. The city itself was the trap. Every street I took, every corner I turned, felt like a deliberate channel, hurting me. The patterns were no longer subtle. Streetlights flickered in rhythmic sequences as I passed beneath them. The reflections in shop windows showed me with a fractional delay, my image struggling to keep up with my body. The gray was spreading. I saw it in the gaps between cobblestones, in the matte surface of new litter bins, in the dark, unblinking screens of ticket machines on the tram platform. I didn't go back to my flat. It was compromised, a node in the network. Instead, I went to the one place that felt like my own genesis, the grind and found. It was late, long past closing. I still had my key. I let myself in, the familiar scent of coffee and toasted sugar a phantom limb from a world that was rapidly fading. My confrontation wasn't with a person or a monster. It was with an idea, a process. I stood in the center of the shop, the place where I had first tried to explain the anomaly to Liam, and I finally understood. The gentrification wasn't a metaphor for the contagion. It was its method of delivery. We had done this to ourselves. We had craved the clean lines, the minimalist aesthetic, the seamless interface. We had torn down the messy, chaotic, inefficient old world and replaced it with smooth concrete, sheer glass, and cool, sterile spaces. We had laid the perfect groundwork for a reality that valued logic and data over life and memory. We had built the temple, and now the god was moving in. My camera was in my bag. I pulled it out. My anchor, my tool for defining truth. It felt laughably obsolete, like bringing a quill pen to a coding convention. I pointed it at the street outside. The world through the viewfinder was already starting to break down. The edges of buildings shimmered with digital artifacts. A passing bus left a trail of ghost images. The front door of the coffee shop clicked open. It was Liam. He must have seen the lights on, gotten a security alert on his phone. He looked exhausted, his face etched with a deep, genuine worry that broke my heart. "Ilara? What the hell are you doing here?" he asked, his voice strained. "I've been so worried. You vanished. People are saying, you've not been well." "It's happening, Liam," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The change. You can't see it, can you?" He took a step towards me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Listen to me. Let's just go. We can get you some help. Whatever you think is happening, we can." He stopped. His foot had landed on the doormat. A new, stylish, charcoal gray doormat we'd gotten last week to replace the old, frayed one. His eyes went blank. It was instantaneous. The worry drained from his face, replaced by a profound, untroubled emptiness. His hand came up. Tap. Tap tap. Tap. The same rhythm as the first man I'd ever seen. The base code. The default setting. "Liam." I whispered. The sound didn't seem to register. He stood there, my friend, his body executing a function he hadn't written. The horror that washed over me was absolute. It wasn't the terror of a monster, but the silent, administrative horror of a file being deleted. Liam was gone. The complex, witty, worried person I knew had been overwritten by this placid automaton. The final revelation bloomed in the ruins of my panic. Arthur had been wrong about the focal point. Or maybe he had lied. The data center was a major artery, yes. But the heart, the true keystone, as he'd called it, was this. Places like this. The new, trendy, authentic spots that were systematically replacing the city's soul. Grind and found was ground zero. It was the beachhead of the new reality. And I, the barista, the photographer of urban truth, had been its willing gatekeeper. There was no escape. The city was a closing circuit. The world was being paved over with silent, logical gray. I could run to another city, another country, but the update was global. It was human. We had opted in the moment we decided a clean surface was better than a storied one. I looked at Liam, tapping in the doorway. I looked at my useless camera. I had a choice. I could let the gray take me completely, step on the mat and become another tapper, another empty vessel. Or I could do something else. My sketchbook was in my bag. I took it out, along with a pen. I sat down at one of the polished concrete tables. My hands were shaking, but I forced them still. Arthur's words came back to me: you cannot stand on the shore and command the tide to stop. You can only learn to swim. I looked at the patterns the touched were making. The tapping, the tracing, the numbers they muttered. It was a language. A simple, programmatic language. Maybe it couldn't be fought, but perhaps it could be written. I opened the sketchbook to a clean page. I ignored the terror, the grief for Liam, for the world. I focused. I began to draw. Not pictures of things that were, but patterns. I started with the tapper's rhythm, a dot, two dots, a dot. Then the tracer's five-pointed shape. I copied them, learned their feel, their flow. Then, slowly, tentatively, I started to change them. I added a curve to the five-pointed shape. I added a pause to the tapping rhythm, drawing it as a space on the page. I wasn't fighting the code. I was trying to write my own variation. A patch. A virus. A prayer. A single line of graffiti in the pristine code of the new world. I don't know if I'm succumbing or resisting. Perhaps there's no longer a difference. My world is gone. The silence is spreading. Liam stands in the doorway, a metronome marking the end of an era. But here, in the epicenter of the quiet contagion, I sit. My camera is on the table, a relic of a forgotten religion. My sketchbook is open. I am no longer a photographer of reality. I am becoming an architect of my own small, defiant anomaly, sketching impossible geometries in a city that is forgetting how to dream. The gray is coming for me, I know. But I will meet it with a pen in my hand, and on the page, I will leave a ghost. The quiet contagion, nothing on Channel 13. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My name is Leo, and I fix things that are broken. It's a simple trade. A pixelated screen, a dead connection, a modem that has surrendered its will to live, these are problems with solutions, puzzles with finite pieces. I find comfort in the logic of it, the clean binary of cause and effect. A faulty cable, a corrupted driver, a fried capacitor. You diagnose, you replace, you reboot. The world, in my experience, is a much messier algorithm. I work for Omnicabo, the company whose blue and white vans are as common as stray dogs in the streets of Fortaleza. We are the purveyors of connection, the high priests of bandwidth. Mostly, it's mundane. Resetting routers for people who don't know the difference between a modem and a toaster, or running new coaxial for a family that wants the premium sports package in a third bedroom. The office is, or was, a place of controlled chaos. A symphony of ringing phones, technicians shouting jokes over cubicle walls, the floor a tangled serpent's nest of discarded wires, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and ozone. My corner was my sanctuary, a small island of order where my tools lay in neat, felt-lined rows. The first ripple in the stagnant water of my routine was a service ticket. Ticket hashtag 734A. Customer reports interference on Channel 13. I didn't even look up. Channel 13? I said to the air. That's not even on our digital map. It's a dead frequency. Ricardo, whose workstation was a monument to entropy, leaned back in his chair until it groaned in protest. Probably some old Volvo with a TV from the last century. Thinks the antenna on the roof still does something. He grinned, a flash of white in his perpetually sun-kissed face. I'll take it. Easy one. Probably just needs to switch to the HDMI input. He went. He came back 2 hours later, whistling. The ticket was closed. Resolution: educated customer on digital transition. Standard procedure. The next day, Ricardo was different. The change was so subtle it was almost invisible. He arrived on time, which was a minor miracle in itself. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to his disaster zone of a desk and began to organize it. He coiled loose cables with a practiced, deliberate motion. He wiped down his monitor. He aligned his keyboard and mouse so they were perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. We all watched, bemused. Spring cleaning, Ricardo? Marcia asked from across the hall. Ricardo didn't look up. He just hummed. It wasn't a tune from the radio or a half-remembered samba. It was a low, monotonous, single-note drone. He spent the entire morning cleaning his tools, polishing the plastic casing of his signal meter until it gleamed. When I asked him about the call from yesterday, the one on channel 13, his hands stilled for a moment. It was nothing, he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual boisterous warmth. Just static. He turned back to his work, and the low hum resumed. Over the next week, 4 more tickets came in. All for channel 13. Fuzzy screen. No picture. Strange noise. The callers were never angry, which was a red flag in itself. An irate customer is the natural state of our universe. A placid one is an anomaly. Sergio, our boss, a man whose pragmatism was his religion, assigned the tickets out. Must be a signal bleed from that new cell tower by the municipal stadium, he declared, ending all discussion. Get it done. Marcia took one. Felipe, the new kid, took another. The following days, they joined Ricardo's quiet cult. Marcia, who normally painted her nails a different vibrant color every day, came in with them bare, clean, and perfectly filed. She spent an hour scrubbing the break room microwave with a bottle of bleach she'd brought from home. Felipe, a kid who usually couldn't stop talking about video games, sat silently at his desk, sorting zip ties by color and length. And they both hummed. Sometimes, when they were in the same room, their humming would synchronize into a single, resonant tone that set my teeth on edge. The office grew quiet. The friendly chaos was replaced by a sterile, unnerving efficiency. The background noise of the city outside seemed to fade, and all I could hear was that low, ceaseless hum. I was an island of disarray in a newly ordered world, and the tide was rising. I decided to take the next call myself. Ticket #741B. The address was in Aldeota, a neighborhood of sun-bleached apartment blocks and elderly residents. The name on the ticket was Elsa Morais. The apartment building smelled of dust and frying garlic. Dona Elsa's door was opened by a woman who must have been her daughter, her face etched with a weary concern. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, gesturing me inside. "It's my mother. She just sits." The apartment was clean. Not just tidy, but surgically, obsessively clean. The air stung with the scent of pine-scented disinfectant and something sharper, like bleach. Every surface shone. The doilies on the armrests of the sofa looked starched and ironed. In the center of the living room, in a worn velvet armchair, sat Dona Elsa. She was a tiny woman, swallowed by the chair, her hands resting peacefully in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the television, a chunky CRT model that was probably older than I was. The screen was a churning, roiling sea of black and white pixels. A blizzard of pure static. The sound was a deafening hiss, a waterfall of white noise. Yet, there was a rhythm to it, a pulse hidden beneath the chaos. It drew the eye, lulling the mind. I felt a strange, synaptic pull, a desire to just stand there and watch the meaningless patterns dance. Dona Elsa had a faint, serene smile on her face. She didn't look at me when I entered. Her daughter wrung her hands. She's been like this for 3 days. Ever since she found that channel. She won't eat. She just watches. I cleared my throat. Dona Elsa? No response. I went through the motions. I checked the thick coaxial cable running from the wall. It was secure. I checked the back of the TV. Everything was plugged in correctly. I picked up the remote, my thumb hovering over the power button. "Ma'am, this channel, it's not real," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud over the roar of the static. "It's an old analog frequency. There's nothing being broadcast on it." For the first time, she stirred. Her head turned, slowly, as if moving through water. Her eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but they landed on me. The serene smile didn't waver. "It's very peaceful," she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "The signal is so clear." Her gaze drifted back to the screen. A chill, completely unrelated to the apartment's air conditioning, crawled up my spine. "The signal is clear." The same words Ricardo had mumbled. I told the daughter there was nothing I could do. The equipment was working perfectly. As I packed my toolkit, I could feel the static behind me, like a physical presence, a vast, empty thing that was somehow full. The hiss seemed to fill the unnaturally clean apartment, soaking into the walls, the furniture, the very air. Leaving that apartment felt like surfacing for air after being held underwater. The chaotic noise of the city street was a profound relief. That weekend, I needed to escape the creeping strangeness of my workplace. I went to visit my sister, Sophia. She was my anchor, my one connection to a world that still made sense. She was a whirlwind of creative energy, a university student studying design, her apartment a testament to her vibrant, messy life, canvases leaning against walls, textbooks piled on chairs, clothes draped over every available surface. It was the complete opposite of Dona Elsa's sterile box, and I loved it. We ordered pizza, argued about a terrible movie on Netflix, and for a few hours, the world felt normal again. The low hum in my head faded. As I was getting ready to leave, I walked past her bedroom. The door was ajar. She was sitting on her floor next to a small, portable television, one of those little boxy ones she'd had since she was a kid. She was turning the dial, which clicked with a satisfying, mechanical sound. "What are you doing with that old thing?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, a frustrated little frown on her face. "I don't know. I found it in the closet. I was trying to find that old music channel, you know, the one we used to watch. But all I get is this." She turned the dial one more click. The screen, which had been black, erupted into a familiar, churning blizzard of static. The room filled with that same hissing roar. Channel 13. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over me. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Turn it off, Soph," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Why?" "It's just static," she said, her eyes still on the screen. "Please. Just turn it off." She shrugged and clicked the dial. The static vanished, and the room was blessedly silent. But as she stood up, she looked at the blank screen for a moment too long, a thoughtful, distant expression on her face. "It's weird," she said, almost to herself. "It's kind of pretty." I left her apartment that night with a knot of ice in my stomach. The contagion wasn't just in the homes of the elderly or the workstations of my colleagues. It was at my sister's door, knocking politely, waiting to be let in. The quiet was spreading. Underscore 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 underscore. The following Monday, I started a log. Not an official one on the company server, but a private one, a black notebook I bought from a corner store. I needed to see the pattern, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. I started with a map of the city, torn from a tourist guide. With a red pen, I marked the location of every Channel 13 service call. The first was Ricardo's call, in the west. The next few were clustered nearby. Then came Dona Elza's, further east. The new ones from this week began to trace a path, like a creeping mold, spreading outward from a single, central point, the old, derelict municipal broadcast tower on the edge of the mireless district, a skeletal finger of rust pointing at the sky. I documented the behavioral changes in my colleagues. Day 1, Ricardo. Obsessive cleaning. Monotonous humming. Verbal tick, just static. Day 3, Marcia. Bare nails. Compulsive tidying. Synchronized humming with Ricardo. Day 4, Felipe. Color code supplies. Silent unless spoken to. Verbal tick, the signal is clear. They were becoming more alike every day. They moved with a placid economy of motion. They took their coffee breaks at the exact same time, sitting in the break room in silence, stirring their cups in perfect unison. The first time I saw them do it, I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't human. It was like watching a flock of birds turn on a wire, moved by a single, invisible command. My own space became a glaring beacon of disorder. A stray wire on my desk would be coiled and secured by Marcia when I turned my back. A smudge on my monitor would be wiped clean by Felipe. They weren't being helpful, they were correcting an error in the system. I was the error. I tried to talk to Sergio. I brought my notebook, my map with its creeping red stain. I laid it all out on his desk, my voice low and urgent. Sergio, look. It's a pattern. It's spreading from the old tower. And Ricardo, Marcia, they're not just more disciplined. They're wrong. Something is happening to them. He steepled his fingers, his face a mask of paternalistic concern. He glanced at my map, at my frantic notes. Leo, you've been working too hard. Overtime, stress, it makes the mind play tricks. You're seeing ghosts in the machine. It's not in my head. Go and talk to them. Ask them about anything other than work. Ask them what they did last weekend. They're focused. It's an improvement, he said, his voice firm, final. I wish all my technicians were this dedicated. Now, I have a meeting. We can talk about you taking some time off later. He dismissed me. As I walked out of his office, feeling foolish and paranoid, my eyes caught something new. Tucked away on a bookshelf behind a stack of binders, almost completely hidden, was a small, black portable television. The kind with a dial. It was unplugged, its screen dark. But I could see, even from the doorway, that the silver channel selector was pointing to one number. 13. The isolation was no longer a feeling, it was a physical state. I was a foreign body inside an organism that was slowly, methodically trying to assimilate or expel me. The city itself began to feel alien. The familiar rhythms were off. I saw it everywhere now that I knew what to look for. A man on the bus, staring at the scuffed floor, his lips moving silently, forming a soundless hum. A woman in the supermarket, meticulously arranging cans of palm hearts into a perfect pyramid, her movements fluid and robotic. A group of teenagers at a bus stop, not talking or scrolling through their phones, but standing in a silent, placid line, all facing the same direction. The world was being muted. The vibrant, chaotic soundtrack of Fortaleza, the cacophony of traffic, the distant pulse of foro music, the shouts of vendors, the laughter spilling from open-air bars, was being turned down, replaced by a subliminal hum that resonated deep in my bones. It was the sound of the static, even when there was no TV in sight. I needed to know more. I threw myself into the only kind of investigation I knew, digging through data. I spent my nights scouring the internet, searching for any information on the old municipal broadcast tower in Channel 13. Most of it was municipal records, dry and uninformative. The station went off the air in 1998. The official reason was a fire in the main transmitter room. An electrical fault. But deep in the digital archives of an old local newspaper, O Povo, I found a series of articles from that time. The station wasn't just Channel 13. It had a name, TV Ametista. Amethyst TV. Its slogan, printed beneath a grainy logo, was, Clarisa e Comunidade. Clarity and Community. The station's founder and chief engineer was a man named Dr. Elias Alencar. The articles painted him as a brilliant but eccentric recluse. He'd inherited a fortune and poured it into this strange little municipal station. An interview described his vision, using television not for entertainment, but for social harmonization. He had fringe theories about bioresonant frequencies, and their potential to calm the mind, to smooth out the violent, chaotic aberrations of the human psyche. His work was largely dismissed by the scientific community as dangerous pseudoscience. Then I found it. A tiny, buried article from a week after the fire. It mentioned a former station employee who had been arrested near the scene. The man, a sound technician, was ranting, claiming the fire was arson, that he and others had started it to stop Alencar. The article quoted the man's frantic claims: he wasn't broadcasting television. He was broadcasting madness. A signal to silence the soul. The man was deemed unstable and committed to a psychiatric hospital. There were no follow-up stories. Madness. A signal to silence the soul. The words echoed Dona Elsa's placid smile, Ricardo's vacant stare. I had to see the tower. It stood in a forgotten, fenced-off lot, choked with capim grass and thorny weeds. The "No Trespassing" sign was so rusted it was barely legible. The lock on the gate was a joke. 2 minutes with a pair of bolt cutters from my van and I was in. The building at the base of the tower was a concrete bunker, scarred by time and neglect. The air inside was heavy with the smell of damp, decay, and something else, a faint, electric tang of ozone. The main control room was a scene of industrial carnage. Charred consoles. Melted tangles of wires hanging from the ceiling like dead vines, a thick layer of soot and dust over everything. It looked exactly like the site of a decades-old fire. But something was wrong. My eyes, trained to trace lines of power and data, saw it immediately. A thin, black line against the grimy floor. It was a new coaxial cable. Pristine. It ran from a ventilation grate near the wall to the back of the largest, most fire-damaged transmitter rack. I followed it. It led to a small, locked maintenance closet. I jimmied the lock with a screwdriver. Inside, the sight made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was a clean, modern server rack, the kind we installed in corporate offices. It was humming, its blue and green LEDs blinking with quiet life. A thick bundle of cables ran from the server into the wall, connecting to a jury-rigged junction box that was leaching power directly from a municipal grid conduit. Freshly installed. Active. Someone had brought TV Ametista back to life. This wasn't a signal bleed or a ghost in the machine. It was a deliberate broadcast. A targeted attack. I stumbled out of the tower, my mind racing. Who? Why? Was Alencar still alive? Or was it a follower, a disciple of his mad science? I was halfway to my van when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was thin, strained with a panic she was trying to suppress. Leo. It's Sophia. I can't get her to answer her door. I went by her apartment, and she wouldn't let me in. She said she was busy. Busy doing what? I asked, my blood running cold. She said she was cleaning. Leo, her neighbor called me. She said she could hear a strange humming noise from the apartment all day. Please, can you go? You have a key. I drove like a madman, the city a blur of muted colors outside my window. I used my key to get into Sophia's building and ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. I didn't bother knocking. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The chaos was gone. Her vibrant, messy apartment was spotless. The canvases were stacked neatly against a wall. The books were arranged on their shelves by size. The floor was so clean it squeaked under my boots. And in the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Sophia. She was watching her little portable TV. The screen was a churning sea of static. The hissing filled the room, so much louder in this context, so much more malevolent. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated, fixed on the screen. She was humming. The same low, monotonous drone as Ricardo and Marcia and Felipe. I moved slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. Soft. She didn't respond. My hand shot out and I yanked the power cord from the wall. The static vanished. The hissing stopped. The silence that rushed in was absolute and terrifying. Sophia's head turned towards me, the movement slow, fluid, unnatural. Her eyes, my sister's eyes, were empty. The life, the fire, the chaotic spark that made her Sophia was gone. She looked at me not with anger or annoyance, but with a look of profound, placid disappointment. "I was watching," she said, her voice a perfect monotone. The signal was so clear. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The world had shrunk to the size of my sister's unervingly clean apartment. Staring at her vacant eyes, I felt a kind of cold fury I'd never known. This wasn't a puzzle to be solved anymore. It was a war, and the first casualty was sitting on the floor in front of me. I tried to talk to her, to shake her out of it. I told her we were going to our mother's, that she needed to get out of here. She just looked at me with that placid emptiness. "Everything is in its proper place now," she said. "Why would I leave?" I had to force her out. I packed a bag for her with her essentials, my movements clumsy in the sterile environment she had created. Her lack of resistance was more frightening than any struggle would have been. She moved as I directed her, a doll made of flesh and bone. At our mother's house, she found a cloth and began to silently, methodically wipe down the kitchen counters. My mother watched, her face a crumpled mask of confusion and fear. "What's wrong with her? Leo? What is this?" I had no answers to give her. I just said she was sick, that I was trying to figure it out. It was the weakest of lies, but it was all I had. My notebook became my obsession. I couldn't go to the police. How could I articulate this? "Hello, officer. An old TV channel is making people too clean and they hum." I would be the one committed, just like that technician from 1998. No, this was my problem. I had to be the one to diagnose it. I concluded that Dr. Alan Carr's theories weren't just theories. The static wasn't noise, it was information. A complex, hypnotic waveform engineered to interface directly with the brain's pathways. It was a virus delivered by light and sound, overriding the complex, messy code of human personality with a simple, clean subroutine: order, docility, compliance. TV Amethysta was a weapon of mass sanitation. My research into Alan Carr hit a wall. He had no living relatives. He dropped out of public life years before the fire and was presumed to have died sometime in the early 2000s. There were no obituaries, no records. The man was a ghost. But the ghost had a legacy, and it was being broadcast from that rusty tower. I needed an ally, someone who wouldn't think I was crazy. My mind kept returning to the old newspaper articles, to the name of the journalist who had written the piece about the disgruntled employee. Helena Rios. She was the only other person on record who had touched the edges of this story and seen something other than an industrial accident. Finding her wasn't easy. She wasn't on social media. She hadn't published an article in over 15 years. I finally found a last known address through an old public records database, a crumbling apartment block on the far side of the city, a place that time and the municipal maintenance department had forgotten. The building's lobby was dark and smelled of mildew. The name H. Rios was still on the mailbox for 4B, the faded ink barely visible. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The door to 4B was covered in scratches, and the peephole was blacked out with tape. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, louder. Helena Rios. My name is Leo. I need to talk to you about TV Ametista. The sound of several locks being undone, a chain rattling. The door opened a crack, and a single, suspicious I peered out. Who are you? How do you know that name? The voice was raspy, laced with years of cigarettes and paranoia. I'm a technician with Omnicabo. People are getting sick. It's the signal. It's back. The door closed. I heard the locks turning again. I was about to give up when it opened wide. Get in. Quickly. I stepped inside and she bolted the door behind me. The apartment was the polar opposite of the ones infected by the signal. It was a fortress of chaos. Every surface was buried under stacks of newspapers, books, files, and loose papers. The windows weren't just closed, they were covered from edge to edge with aluminum foil, shiny side out, taped securely to the frames. The only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Helena was a woman who looked like she was being slowly eroded by her own anxiety. She was thin, wiry, with sharp, intelligent eyes that darted around the room, constantly checking the foil-covered windows. You're from the cable company, she stated, not a question. You've seen it. The blankness in their eyes. The cleaning. The humming. I nodded, my heart pounding with relief. Yes. My sister, my colleagues. Sit, she commanded, clearing a stack of files from a rickety chair. Tell me everything. I told her. I showed her my map, my notes on the behavioral changes, my discovery at the tower. She listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing, occasionally nodding as if I were confirming things she already knew. When I finished, she let out a long, shuddering breath. I knew it, she whispered. I knew they didn't get all of it. She explained what her investigation had uncovered 20 years ago, things the police had ignored and her editor had refused to publish. Alan Carr wasn't just an engineer, he was a zealot. He believed humanity was a disease. A chaotic infestation on a perfect, orderly planet. He saw our emotions, our ambitions, our very individuality as flaws in the system. His signal wasn't meant to entertain or inform. He called it the Great Silence. A frequency that could reset the human mind to its factory settings, a state of pure, thoughtless, placid order. The fire, I started. Was us, she said. Not me, directly. I was just the journalist sniffing around. But I found them. A handful of station employees who understood what he was doing. The sound tech, a camera woman, a secretary. They knew they couldn't expose him. Who would believe them? So they decided to burn it down. They destroyed his research, his equipment. They thought they'd stopped him. So who's broadcasting it now? She shook her head, running a hand through her unkempt gray hair. A disciple. A true believer who found his notes. Or, something else. Her eyes darted towards the foil-covered windows. Alan Carr talked about the signal as if he'd discovered it, not invented it. As if he'd found a frequency that was already there, waiting in the ether. A signal from elsewhere. The idea sent a fresh wave of dread through me. This was bigger than a dead doctor's mad science project. We have to stop it, I said. A flicker of something, hope, or maybe just grim purpose, lit up her eyes. The fire was a crude solution. A modern broadcast requires a modern defense. A counter-frequency. A jamming signal. Something to introduce noise into his perfect, silent picture. An alliance was forged in that cluttered, foil-lined room. Helena had the theory, the history. She had Alencar's original schematics for the broadcast tower, salvaged from a trash can outside the station days before the fire. I had the practical skills, the knowledge of the city's cable infrastructure, the access to the equipment we would need. Our plan was audacious. We would build a portable, high-gain transmitter. We'd use Helena's knowledge of Alencar's work to calculate a specific counter-frequency, a wave of pure, chaotic digital noise designed to disrupt the bioresonance signal at its source. Then, would use my technicians' access to get us to the top of the Omnicabo building downtown, the tallest building in the city, and broadcast our jamming signal directly at the old tower, fighting fire with fire. For the next week, her apartment became our workshop. I borrowed components from the Omnicabo supply closet, signal amplifiers, a power inverter, a portable waveform generator. My colleagues didn't notice. They were too busy polishing their screwdrivers and humming in unison. Helena and I worked late into the nights, fueled by stale coffee and a shared, desperate urgency. The apartment was a mess of wires, soldering irons, and complex equations scrawled on whiteboards. Amidst the technical work, I started noticing small inconsistencies in Helena's behavior. She was paranoid, yes, but her paranoia had its own rigid rules. Her stacks of newspapers were not random, they were arranged chronologically. Her books were sorted by a complex system only she understood. It was a different kind of order, a chaotic order, but an obsession nonetheless. One night, while I was calibrating the waveform generator, I heard her humming. It was quiet, almost subliminal. But it was the same monotonous, single-note drone. I froze, the tiny screwdriver in my hand suddenly feeling slick with sweat. I turned my head slowly. She was standing by one of the foil-covered windows, tracing the edge of the tape with her finger, back and forth, back and forth. "Helena," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She stopped, startled, as if waking from a dream. "What?" "Just thinking." But the seed of doubt was planted. I started watching her more closely. The next day, while she was out getting groceries, a rare and hurried excursion, I searched her apartment. I didn't know what I was looking for. In her bedroom, behind a stack of books on signal theory, I found it. A small portable TV. The same model as my sister's. Its dial was set to 13. The betrayal was a physical blow. Her paranoia, the foil, the chaos, it wasn't a defense against the signal. It was a symptom of it. She wasn't one of the people who had fought Alencar. She was one of his early victims. The signal hadn't worked on her properly. Instead of making her placid and orderly, it had latched onto her innate anxiety and amplified it into a full-blown obsessional paranoia. Her entire life had become a behavioral loop. She wasn't trying to stop the signal. She was trying to perfect it. I confronted her when she returned. I held up the small TV. "What is this, Helena?" The mask of the paranoid journalist fell away. Her frantic energy collapsed into a chilling calm. Her eyes took on that same distant, unfocused quality I'd seen in my sister. "The broadcast is flawed," she said, her voice the monotone of the converted. "It's impure. Alencar was close, but the fire, it damaged the core schematics. The new broadcast is a crude approximation. It creates order, but it's a fragile, simple order. It lacks elegance." She gestured to the device we had been building. "This isn't a jammer, Leo. It's an amplifier. A focusing lens. It will correct the frequency, purify the signal. It will usher in the true great silence. The one Alencar dreamed of." She moved towards the door, her hand reaching for the locks. "You see, don't you? The beauty of it. The peace. No more messy thoughts. No more pointless pain. Just clarity." I was trapped. My ally was my enemy, a high priestess of the very cult I was trying to destroy. And I had just spent a week building her a weapon. The quiet contagion had been in the room with me all along, hiding behind a mask of shared purpose, patiently waiting. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The air in the cluttered apartment crackled with a new, terrifying tension. Helena was no longer a frantic recluse, she was a gatekeeper, her body language radiating a calm, absolute certainty that was far more menacing than her previous paranoia. "You can't leave, Leo," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You're the final component. Your access codes, your knowledge of the network. You are the key to perfecting the broadcast." My mind raced, frantically searching for an escape route, a flaw in her fortress. The windows were foiled, the door was a bastion of locks and chains. My tools were on the workbench across the room. "Helena, listen to me," I tried, stalling for time. "This isn't peace. It's erasure. You're not you anymore. Alencar's signal, it's not a cure. It's a parasite. A parasite cleanses its host of impurities," she replied, her eyes fixed on the device we'd built. "Humanity is the parasite. The signal is the cure." Alencar understood that. He didn't invent it. He was a prophet. He heard a whisper from the universe and dedicated his life to making it a song everyone could hear. A whisper from the universe. The phrase chilled me more than any technical explanation. This wasn't just about a mad scientist's legacy. Alencar had opened a door to something. Something that lived in the spaces between things, in the noise, and it wanted in. The city outside was changing faster now. The effects were no longer subtle. I'd seen it on my way to Helena's. A traffic accident at a major intersection, 2 cars crumpled together. But there was no shouting, no crying. The drivers had simply gotten out of their cars and were now standing on the sidewalk, side by side, staring into the middle distance, humming. Emergency services arrived with an eerie, silent efficiency, clearing the wreckage as the drivers watched with placid indifference. The soul of the city was being systematically dismantled and replaced with a silent, efficient automaton. I saw a flash mob in the Praça do Ferreira. But they didn't dance. At noon, hundreds of people in the square simply stopped. They turned in unison to face northwest, towards the tower, and the collective hum rose into a powerful, resonant chord that vibrated through the cobblestones. For exactly 1 minute they stood, a silent choir, before the chord ceased and they all resumed their business as if nothing had happened. They were organizing. The signal was creating not just individuals, but a network. A hive mind. I had to get out of that apartment. "The power inverter," I said, pointing towards our workbench. "The calibration is drifting. If we're going to broadcast a pure signal, the power feed has to be perfectly stable." It was a gamble, a desperate appeal to the part of her that was still the obsessive technician. For a moment, her placid mask flickered. The compulsion for perfection, the signal's primary command, warred with her suspicion. It won. "Show me," she commanded. I walked to the workbench, my heart hammering against my ribs. Helena stood a few feet behind me, watching. I picked up a multimeter and attached its probes to the inverter, my hands fumbling slightly. The readings were, of course, perfectly fine. "See?" I said, pointing to the stable voltage on the display. "But if there's a surge from the building's grid, it could create a harmonic distortion. We should isolate the circuit." My hand moved from the workbench to a nearby power strip that was feeding half the equipment in the room. Tucked into the nest of wires was a frayed cord I had noticed days ago, leading to an old desk lamp. With my back to her, I took a pair of wire strippers from my pocket. In one swift, fluid motion, I sliced through the insulation of the lamp cord, exposing the copper wires. Then, I shoved the bare wires deep into the vents of the main power inverter we'd been building. The result was instantaneous. A brilliant blue flash, a loud crack, and the smell of burnt electronics filled the air. Every light in the apartment, including the single bare bulb, went out, plunging us into absolute darkness, broken only by the thin cracks of daylight around the foil-covered windows. Alarms from our delicate equipment shrieked and died. In the sudden chaos, I moved. I shoved the workbench towards her, sending tools and components scattering across the floor. I heard her cry out, a sound of genuine surprise and anger. I didn't wait. I scrambled for the door, my hands finding the locks by feel, a bolt, a chain, 2 deadbolts. My fingers, trained by years of working in dark, cramped spaces, flew. 1 lock undone. 2. The chain. The final deadbolt clicked open. I threw the door open and sprinted out into the dim hallway, not looking back. I half expected her to follow, but I heard only a frustrated scream from within the apartment. The purification of her device was now her primary objective. My escape was secondary. I hit the street and didn't stop running for 3 blocks. I was on my own, completely and utterly. My only ally was a true believer, and I had left her with a nearly completed weapon. How long would it take her to repair it? A day? 2. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my boss, Sergio. Mandatory staff meeting. Omni Cabo HQ, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Attendance is compulsory. Compulsory. The word was cold, sterile. A command. They were mobilizing. They needed my access, my skills. Helena was right. I was a key. A new, desperate plan began to form in my mind. It was reckless, probably suicidal. Helena wanted to purify the signal. I would do the opposite. I couldn't fight it with a counter-frequency, I didn't have the equipment or the time. I couldn't destroy the tower, it would be defended by an army of the Placid. But I had access to the entire city's central nervous system. Omni Cabo's main data hub. If the signal was the Great Silence, I would answer it with a scream. Not a clean, engineered wave of jamming noise, but a tidal wave of pure, chaotic, digital filth. I wouldn't just introduce static into their static. I would drown their signal in a deluge of everything it sought to erase, every pirated movie, every screaming death metal album, every contradictory political ideology, every nonsensical meme, every bite of the messy, loud, glorious, terrible chaos of human information I could find on the company's servers and the wider internet. I would not broadcast a counter-signal. I would trigger a data seizure. A network-wide aneurysm aimed directly at the frequency band for Channel 13. The stakes were no longer just about saving my sister or the city. I had looked into Helena's eyes and seen the thing that was wearing her skin. This was about defiance. It was about screaming back into the void that we were noisy, chaotic, and imperfect, and that was worth fighting for. The thought was terrifying, but it was the first time in weeks that I felt something other than fear. I felt a sliver of my own defiant, messy humanity returning. I had a purpose. I had a plan. And I had a compulsory meeting to attend. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The next morning, I drove to the Omni Cabo headquarters, a gleaming glass and steel tower that prided itself on being the most connected building in the state. The knot of fear in my stomach had tightened into a cold, hard ball of resolve. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was carrying a bomb. The main lobby was different. The usual morning rush of employees grabbing coffee and chatting was gone. Instead, people moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their footsteps nearly silent on the polished marble. The air was still. And underneath it all, I could feel it, not just hear it, the hum. It was stronger here, a palpable vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the building. This was a nest. My ID badge got me through the security gates. No one looked at me. No one greeted me. I was just another component moving into its designated position. The meeting was in the main boardroom on the top floor. When I entered, my blood ran cold. The room was full. My entire department was there. Ricardo, Marcia, Felipe, even Sergio. They were all standing, not sitting, arranged in neat rows like a silent congregation. They were all wearing their blue Omnicabo uniforms, freshly pressed. At the head of the long table stood Helena. She had cleaned herself up. Her hair was combed, her clothes were neat. She looked calm, powerful. The device we had built sat on the table in front of her, repaired and glowing with a soft, purple light. TV Amethysta. Leo, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the silent room. It was not broadcast through speakers, it seemed to emerge from the air itself. Thank you for coming. We were just waiting for you. The assembled technicians turned their heads in perfect unison to look at me. Their eyes were all the same, placid, empty, waiting. We need your master access, Helena continued, her voice patient, reasonable. The central hub is locked down. Only your credentials can open the final gateways. We need to route the purified signal through the primary fiber network. For maximum clarity. This was the confrontation. Not a fistfight, but a battle of wills in a silent room full of puppets. They weren't going to hurt me. They would just wait. The hum in the room was getting louder, pressing in on me, a physical weight on my skull. It whispered promises of peace, of an end to anxiety, to fear, to the burden of thought. Just comply. It's so much easier. My hand trembled as I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out an access card. I pulled out my company-issued tablet. Of course, I said, my voice hoarse. For clarity. I walked towards the main console at the side of the room, the one that interfaced with the entire building's network. The sea of blue uniforms parted silently to let me pass. Helena watched me, a faint, serene smile on her face. She thought she had one. I plugged the tablet into the console. My master credentials popped up on the screen. I typed in my password. The system granted me root access. Green lines of text scrolled across the screen. Network hub access, granted. Helena nodded. Good. Now, open the broadcast dash. I didn't let her finish. My fingers flew across the virtual keyboard, executing a script I had written during the long, sleepless night. It wasn't a script to open a gateway. It was a digital demolition charge. Execute, data_flood.sh. Target, frequency _band _13.0-13.9 _megahertz. Source, all _local _servers, cache _archive _internet, /dev/random. Initiate, now. I hit enter. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The humming in the room continued. Steady and strong. Helena's smile widened. Then, the main screen behind her flickered. A single frame of a grainy black and white cartoon cat appeared, then vanished. It was followed by a blast of distorted, screaming guitars. The lights in the room strobed violently. The placid hum faltered, breaking apart into a discordant, ugly noise. On the screen, a tidal wave of digital chaos erupted. Terabytes of junk data I had unleashed into the city's network, all converging on that one narrow frequency band. News clips from warring political parties, snippets of 1,000 different songs playing at once, pirated action movies, screaming memes, endless scrolling pages of contradictory text, raw, unformatted code, the beautiful, meaningless chaos of a random number generator. It was the digital scream I had envisioned, a howl of pure, unstructured noise. The effect on the room was immediate and horrific. The technicians, my colleagues, twitched. Their synchronized placidity shattered. Ricardo clutched his head, a genuine expression of pain on his face for the first time in weeks. Marcia stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing silently. Felipe fell to his knees, looking around in utter confusion, as if waking up in a strange room with no idea how he got there. Their individual, messy, human minds were fighting to resurface through the storm of noise I had unleashed. Helena shrieked, a raw, Human sound of fury and agony. No. You're polluting it. The signal. You're hurting it. The main screen flickered again. For a brief instant, between the frames of chaotic data, I saw it. The thing in the static. It wasn't Alan Carr's technology. It wasn't just a frequency. It was a being. A consciousness. It had a shape, but a shape my mind could barely comprehend, a shifting, fractal mandala of television snow and light, a complex geometry that seemed to twist physical space. It pulsed, not with a hum, but with a silent, ancient, malevolent intelligence. Alan Carr hadn't invented a signal. He had tuned a receiver. He had found something that lived in the empty spaces of the electromagnetic spectrum, a parasitic entity that fed on ordered, structured thought, and he had invited it in for dinner. My data flood wasn't just jamming a signal, I was force-feeding an angel a diet of broken glass and filth. The building's alarms began to blare, a real, physical sound that cut through the psychic chaos. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, knocking over a now sobbing Felipe, and sprinted for the emergency exit. The last thing I saw on the screen was the geometric entity spasming, fracturing, dissolving back into the meaningless snow it had come from. I fled the city. I didn't go to my mother's. I didn't check on Sophia. To go to them would be to endanger them. I drove until the sun was setting, until the Omni Cabo Tower was just a memory against the skyline. I didn't know if I had saved anyone, or if I had just traded one form of madness for another. I had broken the hive mind, but what would the pieces become? Would they return to normal, or would they be forever scarred, caught in a fractured loop between their own consciousness and the ghost of the signal? I found a cheap motel off a dusty highway hundreds of kilometers away. The room smelled of cigarettes and despair. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before finally, hesitantly, turning on the old TV. I flipped through the channels. News, a soap opera, a soccer match, a dubbed American movie. All clear. All blessedly, chaotically normal. Then I reached the high end of the UHF band, the channels that should be nothing but empty air. One of them wasn't. It was static. I stared, my heart frozen in my chest. I stared at the roiling, meaningless snow. It was just static. It had to be. But as I watched, my eyes watering from the strain, I thought I saw it. A flicker of movement within the noise. A brief, impossible alignment of pixels into a familiar, geometric pattern, trying to remember its own shape before dissolving back into randomness. I lunged for the TV and yanked the plug from the wall. I sat in the dark, in the ringing silence. But it wasn't silent. Faintly, so faintly it might have just been the blood in my own ears. I could hear it. A low, distant hum. Or maybe it was just in my head now, a phantom frequency I would be tuned to for the rest of my life. The contagion isn't gone. The signal isn't dead. It's just wounded. It's quiet. It's waiting in the noise between stations, in the hum of the power lines, for another prophet to tune in, to turn up the volume. I am a man who has stared into the static and seen the face of God, and it is hungry. And now, I am the one who buys the aluminum foil. I am the one who listens for a sound no one else can hear. I am the one waiting for the quiet to end. The tooth glass. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The first time I heard the phrase, it was from Mrs. Gable. 86, with the translucent, papery skin of a life lived mostly outdoors, she sat in my chair for her 6-month scale and polish. Her own teeth were long gone, replaced decades ago by a full set of acrylic dentures that she cared for with the meticulousness of a museum curator. "You'll be wanting to put a glass out, dear," she'd said, her voice a little gummy around the plastic in her mouth. I was working a fine scaler along the gum line of her lower plate, my loops magnifying the artificial landscape. "A glass out for what, Mrs. Gable?" I asked, my voice muffled by my mask. We were in Port Blossom, a sleepy curve of coastline in New South Wales where the biggest news was usually the seasonal whale migration or a rip at the surf beach. Small talk was the town's primary currency. For the teeth, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Just an empty one. By the bed. For the teeth. I smiled, assuming it was a fragment of some half-remembered folklore, the kind of thing my own grandmother used to say about turning your shoes upside down to ward off spiders. Right you are, I murmured, moving on to the polish. I didn't think about it again until a week later. I was walking home from the surgery, the southerly buster whipping my hair across my face and carrying the briny scent of low tide from the estuary. The path took me past the neat little fibro cottages that lined the bay. Through the window of the Hendersons' house, on a bedside table just visible from the street, sat a single, empty highball glass. It caught the afternoon sun, a small, lonely lighthouse in the gloom of their bedroom. Coincidence, I thought. Just a glass. People leave glasses in their bedrooms. My life in Port Blossom was deliberately, blissfully mundane. I'd moved from Sydney 3 years ago, fleeing a bad breakup and the relentless, grinding pressure of the city. Here, my world was circumscribed by the dental surgery where I worked under the gentle, paternal eye of Dr. Ainsworth, my small apartment overlooking the bowling club, and the Sandpiper Cafe, run by my best and only real friend in town, Sarah. My anxieties were small, manageable things, a patient with poor periodontal health, the rising cost of avocados, the fact that I was 34 and my most committed relationship was with my cat, Molar. The following Tuesday, Sarah mentioned it. She was wiping down the espresso machine, her brow furrowed in concentration. Weirdest thing, she said, not looking at me. Mick started putting a glass of water by the bed. My head snapped up from the local paper. Water? Well, no, that's the thing. It's empty, she said, finally meeting my eyes. He says it's for the teeth. Did you hear about this? Some new health thing. A cold pebble dropped into my stomach. Mrs. Gable said the same thing to me. Just for the teeth. Sarah shrugged, her easygoing nature a buffer against most of the world's oddities. Probably something on one of those morning shows. Some wellness guru. God, I hate them. Anyway, long black. I said yes, but the coffee tasted bitter. I spent the rest of the day trying to rationalize it. It had to be a fad. A meme that had somehow bypassed the internet and was spreading the old-fashioned way, mouth to mouth. I even wasted half an hour on my lunch break googling variations of empty glass waterbed teeth, tooth health ritual, and new dental fads Australia. Nothing. Not a single hit. The silence of the internet was more unnerving than finding 1,000 crackpot articles would have been. It meant this thing, was local. It was ours. The signs accumulated like barnacles on a pylon. An empty tumbler on the reception desk at the real estate agent's office. A schooner glass sitting on the dashboard of a parked Duda. They were always empty. When I started actively looking, I saw them everywhere. It was a silent, shared secret that I was suddenly on the outside of. The first shift came about a month after Mrs. Gable's comment. Patients started asking for mouth guards. Not the expensive, custom-fitted ones we made for bruxism, but cheap, boil and bite guards from the chemist. Just feeling like I should be giving them a bit more protection at night, said Mark Renshaw, a builder with a jaw like a brick and teeth to match. He'd never had a cavity in his life. It's a preventative measure, insisted a young mother, her toddler squirming in her lap. When I mentioned the strange uptick to Dr. Ainsworth, he just polished his glasses and gave me a soft smile. People are taking a renewed interest in their oral health, Chloe. We should be encouraging it. It's good for business, after all. He was right, of course. But it didn't feel like interest. It felt like fear. A quiet, gnawing anxiety that was making the whole town put their teeth in tiny plastic cages every night. Then came the cancellations. A trickle at first, then a steady stream. People who have been coming to us for 20 years, suddenly ringing up to postpone their checkups indefinitely. Everything's fine, they'd say, their voices oddly placid. Just don't need it right now. The hook, the moment the unsettling mundane tipped over into visceral horror, was Mr. Henderson. He'd missed his appointment last week. I'd flagged his file to call and rebook, but he walked in on a Thursday afternoon without an appointment. He stood in the waiting room, smiling at our receptionist, Jody. "Mr. Henderson," Jody said, her professional smile faltering. Are you all right?" I came out from the sterilization room to see what the fuss was about. He was dressed in his usual neat slacks and a polo shirt. But his smile was a catastrophe. There was a dark, bloody gap where his upper right canine, a perfectly healthy, vital tooth I had checked myself not 6 months ago, should have been. A thin trickle of blood ran from the raw socket, down his chin, and had stained the collar of his shirt a rusty brown. He didn't seem to be in any pain. In fact, he looked serene. Blissful, even. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice thick from the blood in his mouth. "I just wanted to let you know you can take me off your list. Everything's been taken care of." He beamed at us, a ghastly, sanguine grin. Then he turned and walked out, leaving a single, perfect drop of blood on the polished floorboards, like a horrifying full stop. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Beside Jody's computer, where it hadn't been that morning, sat an empty water glass. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The Henderson incident broke something open in me. The vague unease I'd been nursing curdled into a cold, sharp-edged dread. This wasn't a quirky health fad anymore. It was self-mutilation, performed with the serene contentment of a monk achieving enlightenment. I started a journal. A cheap spiral notebook from the newsagent, its cover incongruously cheerful with a pattern of cartoon koalas. In it, I documented everything. October 12th, saw 4 more houses with glasses in the window on my walk home. All empty. The chemist is completely sold out of boil and bite mouth guards. I asked the pharmacist, old Mr. Chen, what was going on. He just smiled. "People are being careful," he said. There was a glass on the counter behind him. October 15th, a patient today, a young woman named Bree. Complained of a loose lower incisor. No periodontal disease, no trauma. It was just, loose. Like a baby tooth ready to come out. She seemed almost proud of it. When I suggested a splint, she refused. "It needs to be ready," she said. Ready for what? She wouldn't say. October 19th, at the supermarket. Saw at least a dozen people with the telltale lisp and puffy upper lip of a mouth guard. Worn in the middle of the day. No one batted an eye. It's becoming normal. My attempts to find an anchor in this sea of quiet madness were futile. The first person I turned to was Sarah. I cornered her during a lull at the cafe, my notebook open on the table between us. "Sarah, look at this," I said, my voice low and urgent. "This isn't normal. People are hurting themselves." Mr. Henderson pulled his own tooth out. She wiped a clean table with a damp cloth, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't look at me. Maybe it was time for it to go, Chloe. It was a healthy tooth. I have his chart. There was nothing wrong with it. "The body knows," she said, her voice soft and infuriatingly calm. She finally turned to me, and her eyes had a placid, distant quality I'd never seen in them before. "You're getting worked up over nothing. It's for the teeth. It's a good thing. Don't you want to look after yours?" The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the end of the conversation, a conversational brick wall painted with nonsense. I felt a chasm open up between us. My funny, cynical, grounded friend was gone, replaced by this placid stranger who thought pulling out healthy teeth was just another form of self-care. I left the cafe feeling more alone than I had when I first moved to town. My next attempt was with Dr. Ainsworth. I caught him at the end of the day, presenting my journal, my voice shaking slightly as I recounted the Henderson incident and the loose tooth of the young woman. He listened patiently, steepling his fingers. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old, concerned professional in his eyes. "It is unusual, I'll grant you that, Chloe," he admitted, peering at my notes. "A kind of mass psychogenic phenomenon, perhaps. Stress can manifest in peculiar ways in a small community." He was bleeding all over himself and he was happy about it, David, I pressed. "I'll make some quiet inquiries," he promised. "Talk to Dr. Evans over in Maria, see if he's noticed anything similar." The relief was so profound it almost made me cry. Finally, someone was taking me seriously. But the relief was short-lived. A week later, I came into work to find Dr. Ainsworth humming to himself as he fitted himself for a mouthguard using a kettle and a bowl of water in the staff kitchen. "Just being proactive," he said brightly when he saw me. "Can't be too careful. It's for the teeth, you know." He said it with a wink, as if we were in on a joke together. But it wasn't a joke. It was a surrender. My last bastion of professional sanity had fallen. I was completely, terrifyingly on my own. The town itself was changing. The soundscape was different. At night, I started hearing it, a faint, rhythmic clicking. It came from the houses around me, a dry, insectal sound. It took me 2 nights to identify it. It was the sound of teeth. Dozens of people, all around me, rhythmically, gently, clicking their teeth together. Or maybe they were tapping the glass. A quiet, persistent percussion that set my own teeth on edge. My isolation drove me to seek out others who might be on the outside. My gaze fell on Liam, a kid of about 17 who I'd treated for a chipped incisor after a skating accident. He was a classic outsider, black clothes, headphones permanently attached, a sketchbook full of jagged, angry art. He was quiet, but his eyes were sharp. He saw things. I started noticing him around town, not participating, just watching, a sullen observer. One afternoon, I saw him down by the breakwater, spray painting something on the concrete wall. I approached him cautiously. He tensed, ready to bolt, but relaxed when he saw it was me. "It's okay," I said, holding up my hands. "I'm not going to tell anyone." I looked at the wall. He'd painted a series of strange, interlocking symbols.